The light of 3 moons filtered through the crystal dome of the Grand Pavilion on Calaris 9, casting prismatic shadows across the faces of 10,000 suitors. They had come from the farthest reaches of the Galactic Union, 3,000 species, the most accomplished individuals their civilizations had to offer, all gathered for one purpose: to win the hand of Empress Sirea of the Zalthian Empire. Aiden Cross leaned against a service pillar in the shadows of the maintenance corridor, watching the spectacle through a one-way security panel. His earpiece crackled with chatter from the security team he'd been temporarily assigned to. The pay was good, the job straightforward: keep the VIPs safe, maintain order, go home. Nothing more. "Security checkpoint Delta, status report," came a voice in his ear. "All clear," Aiden responded, his eyes scanning the crowd methodically. 10 years as a human special forces operative had ingrained certain habits. Even 5 years after leaving military service, he still instinctively noted exit points, assessed threats, and cataloged weapons, both the obvious ones and those cleverly disguised as ceremonial ornaments. On the central dais, surrounded by shimmering force fields that appeared decorative but could stop a plasma round, sat Empress Sirea. Even from this distance, Aiden could see what made her the object of such interstellar desire. Her form was humanoid, but her skin emanated a subtle luminescence that shifted with her emotions, currently a cool, detached blue. Her features were striking: high cheekbones, eyes like liquid silver, hair that seemed to float as if underwater. The biological quirk of her species, semi-energy beings who had evolved beyond mere matter, made her both beautiful and otherworldly. But what Aiden noticed most was her expression. After 3 centuries of rule and decades of this elaborate courtship ritual, her face betrayed nothing but practiced politeness and profound boredom. "Next supplicant," announced the Master of Ceremonies, a tall, willowy being with ceremonial markings covering its translucent skin. The latest suitor approached, a reptilian dignitary from the Krell Dominion. He bore a gift, a planet-sized asteroid that had been hollowed out and transformed into a pleasure garden, towed here at tremendous expense. "Your Radiance," the Krell began, his voice amplified throughout the chamber. "I present to you the Garden of Eternal Delight, where the flowers bloom only once a century. I have waited 3 of their blooming cycles to be worthy of your consideration." Aiden suppressed a snort. 3 centuries of waiting for a date? He'd never understand these long-lived species and their Baroque courtship rituals. The Empress nodded graciously. "Your gift honors the Zalthian throne. Ambassador Sorvik, the Empire acknowledges your tribute." The same response she'd given to the previous 4,000 supplicants. A flicker of movement at the edge of Aiden's vision caught his attention. One of the maintenance droids was behaving erratically, its movement pattern deviating from standard protocols. He tapped his comlink twice, signaling a potential security issue to the team leader. "I see it," came the immediate response. "Maintenance anomaly at Section 12. Cross. Investigate but maintain low profile. Probably just a glitch. But we can't risk an incident." Aiden nodded to himself and slipped deeper into the service corridor, moving silently despite his substantial frame. Unlike many humans who'd embraced genetic enhancements, Aiden remained stubbornly unmodified. His strength and reflexes were earned through training, not purchased in a lab. As he approached the droid, its erratic movements became more pronounced. It was a standard Class 3 maintenance unit, programmed for simple tasks like environmental regulation and minor repairs. Now it was repeatedly attempting to access a panel that controlled part of the ceremonial lighting. "Identify," Aiden commanded, keeping his voice low. The droid swiveled its sensor array toward him. "Unit M359 assigned to atmospheric control." It responded in a pleasant, gender-neutral voice. "You're attempting to access lighting controls. Explain." "Atmospheric regulation includes optimal illumination parameters." A reasonable explanation, but something felt off. Aiden tapped his wrist interface, Pulling up the droid's service record, nothing unusual appeared in its maintenance history or programming updates. "Return to your primary function," Aiden ordered, watching the droid carefully. "Compliance," the droid replied, turning away from the panel and resuming its patrol path. Aiden remained in place, watching it disappear around a corner. Only then did he approach the panel it had been attempting to access. A quick scan revealed nothing obviously tampered with, but a small power fluctuation registered on his scanner. Someone had inserted a subtle programming loop into the lighting system. "Command, this is Cross. I've found an anomaly in the environmental controls. Possible tampering, but purpose unclear. Request tech support." "Acknowledged. Sending technician Merrick. Maintain position." Aiden settled in to wait, his back to the wall, eyes constantly scanning. After a few minutes, the service door at the end of the corridor slid open, revealing a wiry human male with a shock of red hair and the distracted air of someone whose mind operated on multiple levels simultaneously. "Merrick," the man introduced himself with a crooked smile. "Where's our problem child?" Aiden gestured to the panel. "Maintenance droid attempted access. I found a subtle power routing modification." Marek whistled, running a diagnostic tool over the panel. "Nice catch. This is sophisticated work. If activated, it would have created a 30-second brownout in this section." He looked up, eyes suddenly sharp. "Including the force field generators." A cold feeling settled in Aiden's stomach. "Not enough to disable them completely?" "No, but enough to create a fluctuation. Someone with the right equipment could penetrate the field during that window." Aiden tapped his comlink. "Command, we have a confirmed security threat. Recommend immediate—" Before he could finish, the lights flickered. Not just in their section, but throughout the entire ceremonial hall. Aiden's training kicked in instantly. "Breach!" he shouted into his comlink, already moving toward the nearest access point to the main hall. "All units, protect the Empress." The service door wouldn't respond to his security override. Someone had locked down the maintenance corridors. "Find another way out," he ordered Merrick. "Alert external security." Without waiting for a response, Aiden sprinted to a manual emergency hatch, designed to function even during complete power failures. He wrenched it open and squeezed through, emerging into a side passage that connected to the main ceremonial hall. Inside, chaos reigned. The brief power fluctuation had triggered panic among the assembled dignitaries. Security personnel were struggling to maintain order, while simultaneously forming a protective perimeter around the imperial dais. But Empress Soraya was no longer there. Aiden scanned the crowd frantically, assessing possible threats and escape routes. His earpiece crackled with overlapping security chatter, most of it useless in the confusion. He switched to the emergency override channel. "This is Security Contractor Cross. I need the Empress's location, now." A tense voice responded, "Unknown. She left the dais during the fluctuation. Imperial Guard lost visual contact." "Impossible." The Imperial Guard were elite warriors with augmented senses and neural-linked tactical systems. They couldn't just lose the most important being in the galaxy. Unless she wanted to be lost. Aiden's instincts, honed through years of combat and crisis situations, took over. If he were a centuries-old Empress, tired of endless ceremony, and suddenly presented with a momentary systems failure, where would he go? Away, as far and as fast as possible. He turned and headed back toward the maintenance corridors, ignoring the frantic commands in his earpiece to report to the central security station. The hunch was irrational, unprofessional even, but something drove him forward. 3 corridors and 2 security bypasses later, Aiden found himself in a seldom-used technical access way that connected the ceremonial chambers to the spaceport. And there, examining a maintenance schematic with evident frustration, stood Empress Soraya of the Zalthion Empire. Up close, her luminescence was more pronounced, pulsing slightly with what Aiden read as annoyance. She wore ceremonial robes that seemed to float around her form, made of a material that shifted like liquid metal. The crown on her head, a delicate lattice of energy-conducting metals, emitted occasional sparks. She looked up as he approached, her expression shifting from frustration to wariness. The light beneath her skin cooled to a defensive blue. "Your Imperial Radiance," Aiden said, stopping at a respectful distance and giving a short, practical bow. Not the elaborate prostration protocol demanded, but enough to acknowledge her status. "The security team is looking for you." "I'm aware," she replied, her voice surprisingly normal for someone of her station. He'd expected the artificial resonance many high-ranking officials employed. "That's rather the point of my being here instead of there." Aiden raised an eyebrow. "There was a security breach. Someone tampered with the force field controls." "Was there?" She didn't sound particularly concerned. "How fortunate. It provided an excellent distraction." "A distraction from what exactly?" She studied him, head tilted slightly. "From the 10,000th identical conversation about how my Suitors gift is the most magnificent in the galaxy, and how they've spent centuries preparing for this moment." She sighed, a surprisingly human gesture. "Do you know what it's like to have 10,000 people desperately trying to impress you, yet not one of them actually sees you?" The question caught Aiden off guard. This wasn't how Empresses were supposed to talk to security contractors. "Can't say that I do," he admitted. "But I know something about people seeing the uniform instead of the person wearing it." She looked at him more carefully, taking in his plain security attire, the minimal tech implants, the way he carried himself. "You're military, or were. Special Forces, Human Expeditionary Division. And now you're here, guarding a ceremonial function on a neutral planet." It wasn't a question, but there was genuine curiosity in her tone. Aiden shrugged. "The pay is good. And you have no interest in impressing me or winning my favor?" There was a hint of amusement in her voice. "With all due respect, Your Radiance, I'm just doing my job, and right now, my job is to ensure your safety." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps, or something more complex. The luminescence beneath her skin warmed slightly, shifting toward violet. "What's your name?" she asked. "Aiden Cross." "Well, Aiden Cross. I find myself in need of assistance. I was attempting to reach the secondary spaceport, but these maintenance tunnels are proving more complex than anticipated." Aiden hesitated. Protocol dictated he should immediately alert the Imperial Guard to the Empress's location. But something in her expression, a mixture of determination and what looked suspiciously like mischief, gave him pause. "May I ask why you're trying to reach the spaceport? Your Radiance?" "You may ask," she replied, the hint of a smile playing at her lips. Aiden waited, but no further explanation was forthcoming. After a moment, he made a decision that would alter the course of galactic history, though neither of them knew it yet. "The quickest route would be through Corridor E17, he said, gesturing to their left. "But there are 3 security checkpoints. The longer route through the environmental control section has only one, and the staff there aren't as vigilant." Her smile widened, transforming her face. Suddenly, she wasn't just beautiful in an otherworldly, untouchable way. She was radiant with genuine emotion. "Thank you, Aiden Cross," she said. "That is the first useful information anyone has given me in approximately 73 years. Before he could respond, the corridor behind them filled with the sound of approaching footsteps, the heavy, synchronized march of the Imperial Guard. "Your Radiance!" called a voice, taut with concern. "Please remain where you are. Security protocols have been activated." Soraya's expression fell, the light beneath her skin cooling rapidly. She looked at Aiden, a silent question in her eyes. "He shouldn't. It was against protocol, against his contract, possibly against interstellar law. Environmental control is through that access panel," he said quietly, pointing to an inconspicuous hatch in the wall. "If anyone asks, I never saw you." The smile she gave him then wasn't the practiced, polite expression of an empress to a subject. It was the conspiratorial grin of one troublemaker to another. "I suspect we'll meet again, Aiden Cross," she said, moving swiftly to the panel and slipping through with surprising grace for someone in ceremonial robes. The panel slid shut just as the Imperial Guards rounded the corner, their ceremonial armor gleaming under the corridor lights. "Contractor," the lead guard addressed him. "Have you seen Her Imperial Radiance?" Aiden gestured back the way he'd come. "I was pursuing a security anomaly in Section 12. Haven't seen anyone come this way." The guard studied him briefly, then nodded. "Return to your post. This area is now under Imperial jurisdiction." Aiden gave a respectful nod and turned to leave, fighting to keep his expression neutral. As he walked away, he couldn't help but wonder what had possessed him to aid in the Empress's escape, or why the brief conversation had left such a strong impression. What he didn't know then was that this brief encounter had set in motion events that would shake the foundations of the galactic order, challenge the very nature of species identity, and force both human and Empress to confront truths about themselves neither was prepared to face. And somewhere in the shadows of the spaceport, unseen by either Aiden or the Imperial Guards, a figure watched the unfolding events with cold calculation. Lord Halvex of the Synthari Dominion had not spent 3 decades preparing his courtship only to be thwarted by a power fluctuation, or by the unexpected intervention of a human security contractor. If Empress Soraya could not be won through traditional means, perhaps it was time to explore alternatives. Alternatives that the 10,000 rejected suitors might find very interesting indeed. The midnight blue of Calaris 9's sky had given way to the pale lavender of dawn by the time Aiden's security shift ended. The ceremonial hall had been cleared, the dignitaries escorted to their respective accommodations, and the security breach thoroughly investigated. The official explanation, a programming error in an aging maintenance droid, satisfied most, though Aiden remained skeptical. He made his way through the waking city toward his temporary quarters, mind still replaying his strange encounter with the Empress. Something about her directness, the moment of genuine emotion when she smiled, had stuck with him. Empress Soraya wasn't what he'd expected. The propaganda broadcasts portrayed her as a remote, almost divine figure, a semi-energy being whose wisdom and power had guided the Zalthian Empire for centuries. The woman he'd met in the corridor seemed trapped, surrounded by adoration but starved for connection. Aiden shook his head, dismissing the thought. It wasn't his problem. Tomorrow he'd collect his pay and move on to the next contract. The affairs of empresses and galactic politics were well above his pay grade. His quarters were Spartan but comfortable, standard accommodations for visiting security personnel in the diplomatic sector. Aiden had just removed his equipment and collapsed onto the bed when his comm unit chimed with an incoming transmission. The ID marker was blank, unusual on a planet with strict communication protocols. "Cross," he answered cautiously. "Contractor Cross." The voice was female, cultured, with the slight resonance of a vocal modulator, standard for high-ranking officials who wish to maintain privacy. "Your presence is requested at the Imperial Spire. Transport has been arranged. It will arrive in 30 minutes. "Who is this?" Aiden asked, though he had his suspicions. "Someone who values discretion and competence, both of which you demonstrated last night." The connection terminated before he could respond. 30 minutes later, a sleek transport vessel with the Zalthian Imperial insignia landed on the building's private pad. A steward emerged, bowed to Aiden, and gestured him aboard without a word. The journey to the Imperial Spire, a kilometer-tall structure of impossible architecture that served as the Zalthian Empire's diplomatic headquarters on Calaris 9, took less than 10 minutes. Throughout, Aiden remained alert, assessing potential threats and escape routes from habit. Upon landing, he was escorted through a series of security checkpoints, each more sophisticated than the last. Finally, He was shown into a private chamber, high in the spire, with panoramic views of the city below. "Contractor Cross," announced the steward, then withdrew, leaving Aiden alone in the room. Not quite alone, he realized. A figure stood by the window, silhouetted against the morning light. She turned, and Aiden recognized the Empress immediately, though she had exchanged her ceremonial robes for simpler attire, still elegant, but designed for functionality. "Your Radiance," he said, offering the same practical bow as before. "Please," she said, gesturing to a chair opposite her own. "There's no need for formalities here. We're speaking privately." Aiden took the offered seat, studying her more carefully in the natural light. Without the elaborate ceremonial attire, she appeared younger, though he knew her species aged differently than humans. The luminescence beneath her skin was subtle now, a gentle gold that suggested calm focus. "May I ask why I'm here?" he inquired. "Because you showed rare judgment last night," she replied directly. "You had the opportunity to alert my guards to my location. Protocol demanded it. Yet you chose to help me instead. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time." Her lips curved slightly. Most people would consider betraying an Empress's trust to be the right thing, especially when following protocol. "I'm not most people." Clearly, she studied him with those silver eyes that seemed to see more than the surface. "Your military record is impressive. Top marks in tactical assessment, leadership, adaptation to extraterrestrial environments, distinguished service during the Orion conflict." Aiden's expression hardened. "You've been looking into my background." "Of course. I don't invite strangers to private meetings without due diligence." She tilted her head. "Your departure from military service is less documented. Care to elaborate?" "Not particularly." His voice was flat, final. Instead of being offended, she nodded. "Fair enough. We all have parts of our past we prefer not to discuss." She leaned forward slightly. "I have a proposition for you. Aiden Cross. A private security contract. Significantly more lucrative than your current arrangement." "What would it entail?" "I'm making a pilgrimage to Elan Va, a sacred world in the Andromeda reaches. It's tradition for an empress to visit before choosing a consort." She said this, matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "The journey requires discretion and security beyond what my regular guards can provide." "Why not use your Imperial Guard?" Aiden asked, suspicion evident in his tone. "They seemed capable enough." "Because they report to the Imperial Council, which includes representatives from every major species in the Zolthian Empire." She sighed, a flicker of frustration passing across her features. "Including several who have sent suitors to the ceremonial gathering." Understanding dawned. "You don't trust them." "I trust them to follow protocol," she clarified. "But this journey requires flexibility. Someone who can make decisions based on the situation rather than preset rules. Someone like me." "Precisely." She rose and walked to a nearby console, activating a holographic display. "This is the standard contract. The compensation is listed on the final page." Aiden's eyes widened slightly at the figure, enough to retire comfortably on any world in the galaxy. "That's generous," he said carefully. "I value competence," she replied simply. "And discretion." Aiden studied the contract, looking for hidden clauses or traps. Finding none, he still hesitated. "This pilgrimage, there's more to it than tradition, isn't there?" For a moment, she said nothing. Then, surprising him, she laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that transformed her face completely. "You continue to surprise me. Aiden Cross. Yes, there's more to it. But those details aren't included in the formal contract. Then perhaps you should tell me what I'm really signing up for." She considered him for a long moment, the luminescence beneath her skin shifting through shades of blue and violet as she deliberated. "Very well," she said finally. The ceremonial aspects are real, but there's another purpose. I've received intelligence suggesting a conspiracy among certain rejected suitors. They view my continued refusal to choose a consort as a threat to the stability of the empire. Is it? Aiden asked bluntly. She didn't take offense at the question. Perhaps. Tradition dictates that an empress chooses a consort after 3 centuries of rule. I've postponed the decision. Why? Because none of them see me, she said, echoing her words from the night before. They see a throne, a bloodline, an empire, not a person. The honesty in her voice surprised him. This wasn't how rulers typically spoke to their subjects, especially not to temporary security contractors. And this pilgrimage will help you decide. In a manner of speaking, Elan Va contains the Temple of Ancestral Light, a place where my species has made important decisions for millennia. The energy fields there allow for certain clarifications. Aiden nodded slowly, processing the information. And you believe these rejected suitors might attempt to interfere? I believe they might attempt more than that. Her expression grew serious. There have been incidents. Nothing definitive. Nothing that couldn't be explained as accidents or coincidences. But too many coincidences become a pattern. You think someone's trying to harm you. I think someone is trying to force my hand. She met his gaze directly. Will you help me, Aiden Cross? He should refuse. Get involved in imperial politics? The feuds of alien royalty? It was a recipe for disaster. But something in her direct gaze, the way she spoke to him as a person rather than a subject, made him reconsider. Besides, he needed the work, and if someone really was targeting her. When do we leave? He asked. Her smile was answer enough. The Imperial vessel. Luminous Harmony slipped into hyperspace with barely a tremor, its advanced propulsion systems making the transition smoother than any human craft Aiden had experienced. From the viewing deck, he watched as the stars stretched into brilliant lines, then vanished altogether, replaced by the shimmering blue-black of hyperspace. 3 days into the journey to Elan Va, and Aiden was still adjusting to his role. The official designation, Special Security Advisor to the Imperial Presence, came with quarters adjacent to the Empress's own and access to nearly every section of the ship. The Imperial Guard, led by Commander Yilrin, a stern Zoltheon warrior with metallic skin and eyes that glowed like embers, had accepted his presence with professional reserve, though their suspicion was evident. Enjoying the view? A now familiar voice asked from behind him. Aiden turned to find Empress Soraya approaching, dressed in simpler attire than her ceremonial robes, though still made of that strange, fluid material that seemed to shift with her movements. Her luminescence was calm, a gentle gold that he was beginning to associate with her more relaxed moments. It's different from human hyperspace, he commented. More stable. Zoltheon drives utilize quantum harmonization, she explained, coming to stand beside him at the viewport. We synchronize with the underlying fabric rather than tearing through it. Sounds more elegant. It is, though less exciting than your military vessels. I imagine. I've heard human ships make quite the dramatic entrance when they drop out of hyperspace. Aiden raised an eyebrow. You've studied human transportation technology? I've studied many things about humans. There was that hint of a smile again. Your species fascinates me. So brief in lifespan, yet so intense in everything you do. You pack more living into a century than some species manage in a millennium. Is that a compliment or an observation? Both. Perhaps. She turned to face him fully. I've been meaning to ask you something. Aiden Cross, why did you leave military service? Your record suggests you were on track for advancement. The question hit a nerve, as she surely knew it would. Aiden's expression closed off immediately. It's not relevant to my current contract. Perhaps not, she conceded. But it's relevant to understanding the man I've entrusted with my safety. Aiden remained silent for a long moment, watching the swirling patterns of hyperspace. Finally, he spoke, his voice carefully controlled. There was an incident. On Proxima Centauri 4, my unit was tasked with extracting a high-value target from a civilian zone. He paused, the memories still sharp even after 5 years. Intelligence was wrong. The target had rigged the entire sector with explosive devices. When we moved in, he shook his head. 347 civilians died. 62 of them were children. Soraya's luminescence deepened to a somber blue. And you blame yourself. I was the tactical officer. I approved the operation. Based on faulty intelligence you couldn't have known was compromised. Aiden looked at her sharply. You've read the classified report. As I said, I did my due diligence. Her voice softened. The inquiry cleared you of all wrongdoing. Paperwork doesn't bring back the dead. She was quiet for a moment, considering his words. No, it doesn't. But neither does self-punishment. Is that what you think I'm doing? I think you're a man of honor who carries a burden that isn't entirely his to bear. She turned back to the viewport. We all have regrets. Aiden. Some of us have had centuries to accumulate them. He studied her profile, struck by the unexpected vulnerability in her tone. What does an empress have to regret? More than you might imagine, she sighed. A surprisingly human gesture. When you live as long as my species does, you have ample opportunity to make mistakes and to watch the consequences unfold over generations. Before Aiden could respond, his security comm unit chimed with an alert. He checked the display. Security sweep in the engineering section, he explained. Standard procedure? She nodded, understanding the demands of his position. We'll continue this conversation another time. Perhaps I find your perspective refreshing. As she walked away, Aiden found himself watching her departure with more interest than was strictly professional. There was something about Empress Soraya that defied his expectations, a directness, a genuineness that contrasted sharply with the remote, almost divine figure portrayed in official broadcasts. He reminded himself sternly that she was not only an alien being with a lifespan measured in centuries, but also the ruler of the most powerful empire in the known galaxy. Whatever personal connection he imagined was just that, imagination. Yet, as he made his way to the engineering section, he couldn't quite shake the memory of her smile when she'd said his perspective was refreshing. As if an empress who had lived for centuries and ruled billions could find anything about a human security contractor novel or interesting. What Aiden didn't see was the way Soraya paused once she was alone in the corridor, her luminescence shifting to a warm violet as she reflected on their conversation. For the first time in longer than she could remember, someone was speaking to her as a person, not an institution. The sensation was as disorienting as it was exhilarating. Meanwhile, in another part of the ship, Commander Yilrin reviewed the security protocols with his elite team, his expression grim. The human remains an unknown variable, he told his second-in-command, a fellow Zolthion with battle scars that disrupted the metallic patterns of his skin. Monitor his activities closely. The Empress's safety is our paramount concern. Could he be connected to the incidents? The subordinate asked. Yilrin's ember-like eyes narrowed. Unknown. But his arrival coincides too neatly with the escalation of threats. And humans have always been unpredictable. What neither the commander nor Aiden realized was that the true threat was already aboard the luminous harmony, buried deep within its systems, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The luminous harmony emerged from hyperspace with the same gentle transition that had marked its departure, materializing in the Elon Vos system with barely a ripple in the fabric of space-time. From the command deck, Aiden watched as the sacred world came into view, a planet of swirling blues and violets, with landmasses that seemed to glow from within. Beautiful, isn't it? Empress Soraya stood beside him, her own luminescence resonating subtly with the planet below. Elan-Va is one of the few worlds where energy and matter exist in perfect harmony. Over the past week of travel, Aiden had found himself spending more time in the Empress's company than his security role strictly required. Their conversations had ranged from the philosophical to the mundane, and he discovered in her a keen intellect and surprising curiosity about human culture and experience. "Is that why it's sacred to your people?" he asked, genuinely interested. "Partly. It's also one of the birthplaces of my species. Before we evolved our current form, we existed as pure energy patterns within the crystal forests that cover much of the surface." She gestured toward a glowing region, visible even from orbit. The Temple of Ancestral Light stands at the heart of the largest forest. Commander Yilren approached, his metallic features set in their perpetual stern expression. "Your Radiance, the landing preparations are complete. We await your command." "Thank you, Commander," Soraya nodded. "Begin the descent sequence. I'll prepare for the arrival ceremony." As the commander departed, she turned to Aiden. "The next phase will be complex. Elan-Va's traditions are ancient and specific. As my special security advisor, you'll be permitted to accompany me to areas forbidden to others. But there will be protocols to observe." "I'm adaptable," Aiden assured her. "Just give me the rules, and I'll follow them." "That's just it," she said, her expression thoughtful. "On Elan-Va, the rules change depending on one's intentions. The crystal forests respond to thought patterns, emotions. It's why the pilgrimage is so important for major decisions. The environment itself helps clarify one's true desires." Before Aiden could ask for clarification, a sudden alarm blared throughout the ship. The command console flashed red, and officers rushed to their stations. "Proximity alert," announced the tactical officer. "Multiple vessels approaching at high velocity. They're not responding to identification requests." Aiden's combat instincts kicked in immediately. "How many?" "7 craft. Unknown configuration. Weapon systems active." Commander Yilren returned at a run, his ember eyes blazing. "Your Radiance, we must move you to the secure chamber. Standard protocol for—" "I am aware of the protocol, Commander." Soraya interrupted, her tone suddenly imperial. "But I need more information before we proceed. Who would dare attack an Imperial vessel in Zalthion space?" The tactical display updated, showing the approaching vessels surrounding their position in a classic encirclement pattern. "Military formation," Aiden observed. "Professional. These aren't pirates." "Incoming transmission," the communications officer announced. "On screen," Soraya commanded. The main view screen flickered, and a face appeared that made Aiden tense immediately. Lord Halvex of the Syntheri Dominion, one of the most prominent suitors at the ceremonial gathering. His reptilian features were arranged in what passed for a smile among his species, though the effect was more predatory than friendly. "Empress Soraya," he greeted, his voice smooth as polished stone. "What a fortuitous encounter." "Lord Halvex." Soraya's voice betrayed no emotion, though Aiden noticed her luminescence cooling to a defensive blue. "Your presence here is unexpected and unwelcome. I merely wish to ensure your safe arrival at the sacred world. These are troubled times, and an empress as valuable as yourself requires proper escort. The Imperial fleet provides all the escort I require. Your vessels will withdraw immediately, or be considered hostile to the Zalthion Empire." Halvex's smile widened, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "My dear Empress, I think you misunderstand the situation. We are not here to threaten, but to renegotiate the terms of our relationship." Aiden stepped closer to Soraya, speaking in a low voice. "This is a setup. The formation, the timing. They were waiting for us." She nodded, almost imperceptibly, then addressed Halvex again. "The Zalthion Empire does not negotiate under duress. Lord Halvex, You have 10 seconds to withdraw before I order defensive measures. I think not. Halvex's expression hardened. You see, I represent not just myself, but a coalition of concerned parties. After 10,000 rejections, we've concluded that traditional courtship has failed. Perhaps a more direct approach is required. The tactical display flashed again, and the weapons officer called out, "Energy buildup detected in the lead vessel. They're preparing to fire." "Shields at maximum," Commander Yilrin ordered. "Prepare evasive maneuvers." But before the helmsman could respond, the ship lurched violently. Emergency lighting activated as the main power systems fluctuated. "Internal systems failure," reported the engineering officer, his voice tight with tension. "Something's disrupting our power core." Aiden's mind raced. It's an inside job. The attack outside is coordinated with sabotage within. Soraya's eyes widened in understanding. The incidents weren't just warnings. They were preparations. Another violent shudder ran through the ship as the first shots from Halvex's fleet struck their weakened shields. "Your Radiance! We must get you to an escape pod," Commander Yilrin insisted, moving toward her. "Negative," Aiden countered. "If there's internal sabotage, the escape pods could be compromised. We need an alternative extraction." Soraya looked between them, decision crystallizing in her eyes. "The surface shuttles in the diplomatic bay. They're on an isolated system." "Too predictable," Aiden argued. "They'll be watching those." "Not all of them." She turned to Yilrin. "Commander, initiate protocol sundering. Full defensive engagement. Buy us time." The commander's ember eyes flared with understanding. "As you command, Your Radiance." He turned to his officers. "Battle stations. All weapons free." As the command deck erupted into organized chaos, Soraya grabbed Aiden's arm. "Follow me, quickly!" She led him through a series of corridors, moving with surprising speed. The ship continued to shudder under enemy fire, and twice they had to detour around sections where emergency bulkheads had deployed. "Where are we going?" Aiden asked, as they entered a restricted area he hadn't been briefed on. "My personal shuttle bay," she explained, placing her hand against a scanner that recognized not just her print, but the unique energy signature of her species. It's shielded from most scanning technologies. The door slid open, revealing a small bay containing a sleek, non-standard craft that bore little resemblance to official Imperial vessels. It looked fast. "This isn't a standard diplomatic shuttle," Aiden observed. "No," she agreed with a hint of that smile he'd come to recognize. "It's better." As they boarded, Aiden noted the advanced systems and unusual configuration. "Does Commander Yilrin know about this?" "He knows I have contingency plans. The details are on a need-to-know basis." She took the pilot's position, her hands moving confidently over the controls. "I assume you can handle weapon systems." "I'm familiar with most configurations," he confirmed, taking the secondary position. The controls were unusual but intuitive, designed for efficiency rather than adherence to Imperial standards. The shuttle bay doors opened, revealing the chaos of space beyond. Halvex's fleet had engaged the luminous harmony fully now, energy weapons creating a deadly light show against the backdrop of Elon Vaugh's swirling atmosphere. "Hold on," Soraya warned, her luminescence intensifying with concentration. "This exit won't be subtle." She wasn't exaggerating. The shuttle shot from the bay like a projectile, its engines flaring with a distinctive blue energy signature Aiden had never seen before. The acceleration would have crushed a normal human, but the shuttle's inertial dampeners, far superior to standard models, kept the pressure manageable. "They've spotted us," Aiden reported, as two of the smaller enemy vessels broke off to pursue. "Coming in fast from starboard." "Let them come," Soraya replied, her hands dancing over the controls. The shuttle responded beautifully, executing a series of maneuvers that should have been impossible for a craft its size. Aiden activated the weapon systems, familiar enough with the basic principles to operate them effectively. Targeting solutions acquired. Permission to engage? Granted. Defensive fire only. We need to reach the surface. He fired a series of precision bursts, not attempting to destroy the pursuing vessels, but to disrupt their approach. One shot connected with a propulsion system, sending the craft spinning off course. "Nice shot," Soraya commented, sounding genuinely impressed. "Lucky hit," Aiden replied, though privately he was pleased by her approval. The shuttle plunged toward Elanva's atmosphere, the second pursuer still doggedly on their tail. As they hit the upper atmospheric layers, the craft shuddered with turbulence. "They're still on us," Aiden reported, watching the tactical display. "And they've called for reinforcements. 3 more vessels entering the atmosphere." Soraya's expression was one of intense concentration, her luminescence pulsing rapidly. "We need to reach the crystal forest. Once there, their technology will be at a disadvantage." "Why?" "The crystal formations disrupt most energy signatures and scanning technologies. It's one of the reasons the temples were built there. Privacy from prying eyes." She adjusted their course, diving deeper into the swirling clouds. "Unfortunately, it will affect my abilities as well, and possibly some of our technology." Aiden processed this new information. "So, we're heading into a zone that will essentially blind both sides. That's risky. Do you have a better suggestion?" There was no challenge in her tone, just a genuine question. He considered their options. "No, but we should prepare for the possibility of a crash landing and subsequent ground pursuit." "Already planning for it," she confirmed, nodding toward a storage compartment. "Emergency supplies, basic weapons, survival gear." The shuttle broke through the cloud layer, revealing the landscape below, and it was unlike anything Aiden had ever seen. Vast forests of crystalline structures stretched across the terrain, catching the light of the system's star and refracting it in dazzling patterns. The structures weren't uniform like trees, but twisted and curved in organic shapes, some reaching hundreds of meters into the sky. "The crystal forest of ancestral memory," Soraya said, a note of reverence in her voice despite their dire situation. "I haven't been here since my coronation ceremony." A warning alarm cut through the moment as their pursuer fired, the energy beam narrowly missing the shuttle. "We can admire the view later," Aiden suggested, returning fire. "Right now, we need to lose them." Soraya nodded, her focus returning to their escape. Preparing for descent into the deep forest, the crystal density there should provide maximum disruption. She guided the shuttle lower, skimming just above the tops of the crystal formations. The pursuing craft followed, though Aiden noted their movements becoming less precise as they entered the disruptive field. "It's working," he confirmed. "Their targeting systems are degrading." "So are our stabilizers," Soraya countered, fighting the controls as the shuttle began to shake violently. "We need to land soon. There's a clearing near the temple approach that should—" She never finished the sentence. A lucky shot from their pursuer clipped their left propulsion system, sending the shuttle into a spin. Aiden felt the inertial dampeners fail as G-forces slammed him against his restraints. "Brace for impact," Soraya called, somehow maintaining partial control of their descent despite the damage. The shuttle plunged into the crystal forest, crystal spires shattering against their hull as they carved a destructive path through the ancient structures. Aiden caught a final glimpse of their pursuer, now joined by others, before the view screen cracked and went dark. With a final, bone-jarring impact, the shuttle crashed into a clearing, skidding across the crystalline ground before coming to rest against a massive formation that glowed with internal blue light. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the hiss of damaged systems and the crystalline tinkling of forest debris settling around them. Aiden's military training kicked in, and he performed a quick self-assessment. Bruised ribs, possibly a minor concussion, but nothing broken or critical. "Soraya," he called, abandoning protocol in the aftermath of the crash. She stirred beside him, her luminescence flickering weakly. "I'm functional," she responded, though her voice sounded strained. "The crash disrupted my energy patterns. I'll need time to stabilize." Aiden unbuckled his restraints and moved to help her. Up close, he could see that her normally smooth luminescence had become erratic, with darker patches where the energy seemed to ebb. "Are you injured?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Not in the way humans understand injury," she explained, accepting his help to stand. "But yes, I am damaged. My ability to manipulate energy will be limited until I can realign my patterns." Outside, the sound of distant explosions suggested their pursuers were having their own difficulties navigating the crystal forest. But they wouldn't stay distant for long. "We need to move," Aiden decided, retrieving the emergency pack from its compartment. "Can you walk?" "Yes." She straightened, her regal bearing reasserting itself despite her weakened state. "The Temple of Ancestral Light is approximately 12 kilometers from here. If we can reach it, we'll find both sanctuary and the means to contact loyal Imperial forces." Aiden nodded, quickly checking the contents of the emergency pack. Basic medical supplies, water purification, high-energy rations, a multi-tool, and a compact energy pistol with limited charges. Not ideal for an extended wilderness trek, but better than nothing. "Let's move," he said, securing the pack and drawing the pistol. "Stay close to me." They exited the shuttle through the emergency hatch, emerging into the alien beauty of the crystal forest. Up close, the formations were even more impressive. Not simple crystals, but complex structures that seemed to pulse with internal light. The ground beneath their feet was a mosaic of smaller crystalline fragments that crunched softly as they walked. "This way," Soraya indicated, pointing toward where the crystal structures grew tallest and most dense. "The temple lies at the heart of the forest." They had barely covered 50 meters when the distinctive whine of approaching craft reached them. "Down," Aiden ordered, pulling Soraya behind a large crystal formation as a search vessel passed overhead. The craft moved erratically, clearly affected by the forest's disruptive properties, but it was searching methodically. "They're deploying ground forces," he observed, noting the thermal signatures of multiple drops around their crash site. "Professional pattern. These aren't just hired mercenaries." "Lord Halvex has access to the Synthari military," Soraya explained, her voice tight with anger. "Though using them against an Imperial vessel is an act of war, I don't think he's concerned about diplomatic niceties at this point." Aiden surveyed their surroundings, formulating a plan. "We need to stay ahead of their search pattern and find cover before nightfall." "Night brings its own challenges here," Soraya warned. "The crystal forest becomes more active after dark. The energy patterns shift." "Active how exactly?" "The boundaries between matter and energy become more permeable. For my species, it's invigorating but disorienting. For solid beings like yourself—" She hesitated. "It can be unsettling. Hallucinations are common." "Wonderful," Aiden muttered. "Hostile pursuers and hallucinogenic crystals. Anything else I should know?" "The indigenous life forms are primarily energy-based and harmless, but they're attracted to strong emotions and can become intrusive." Aiden gave her a sidelong look. "Define intrusive." "They might attempt to synchronize with your brain patterns, creating sensory experiences or emotional responses." "So they get inside your head?" "In a manner of speaking." She actually looked apologetic. "It's considered a spiritual experience for pilgrims." "I'll pass on the spiritual experience. Thanks." Aiden checked their surroundings again, plotting a course that would keep them under the densest crystal cover. "Let's move. Stay low. Minimize noise and follow my lead." As they began their trek through the crystal forest, Aiden couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of his situation. A week ago, he'd been a simple security contractor guarding a ceremonial function. Now, he was helping an alien empress escape assassins on a planet where the local flora might try to read his mind. Yet, despite the danger, or perhaps because of it, he felt more alive than he had in years. Since Proxima Centauri 4, he'd been going through the motions, taking contracts that required minimal emotional investment. This was different. This mattered. And as he glanced at Sireya, moving with determination despite her weakened state, her luminescence pulsing with a quiet courage that matched her regal bearing, he admitted to himself what he'd been trying to deny since their first meeting. He cared what happened to her, not just as a client, not just as an empress, but as a person. The realization was as unwelcome as it was undeniable. In his line of work, personal attachments were a liability, especially when they involved semi-energy beings who ruled galactic empires and lived for centuries. Yet, as they pressed deeper into the crystal forest, the pursuing forces spreading out behind them, Aiden knew he would do whatever it took to get her safely to the temple. Not because of the contract, not because of duty, but because, against all odds and common sense, Empress Sireya of the Zoltheon Empire had become someone he couldn't bear to lose. The crystal forest grew denser as they progressed, the formations taller and more intricate, their internal light pulsing in patterns that seemed almost like communication. The ground became uneven, with crystalline outcroppings that required careful navigation. Above them, the sky had taken on a violet hue as Elon Va's sun began its descent toward the horizon. They had been moving for nearly 4 hours, maintaining a pace that balanced speed with stealth. Twice they'd been forced to hide as search parties passed nearby, their pursuers using disruption fields to counteract the crystal forest's natural interference. "We're being herded," Aiden observed after their latest near encounter. "They're not just searching randomly, they're directing us towards something." Sireya nodded, her breathing more labored than it had been at the start of their journey. Her luminescence had stabilized somewhat, but it remained dimmer than normal, with occasional flickering patterns that suggested ongoing internal distress. "I've noticed the same," she confirmed. "They're driving us away from the temple path." Aiden consulted the rudimentary map they'd managed to download before the shuttle's systems failed completely. "There's a ravine 2 kilometers east. Deep, difficult terrain. Perfect place for an ambush." "We need to break their pattern," Sireya said, studying the map. "There's a formation known as the Resonance Spire, approximately 1 kilometer to the south. If we can reach it, I might be able to use its natural energy amplification properties to send a signal." "To whom?" "The Temple Guardians. They're an ancient order, separate from the imperial structure. If they know an empress is in danger on sacred ground, they'll respond." It was their best option, though Aiden noted she was becoming progressively weaker. The stress of the crash, combined with the disruptive effect of the crystal forest on her energy patterns, was taking a visible toll. "Are you going to make it?" he asked directly. She met his gaze, silver eyes clear despite her physical distress. "I have to." They altered course, moving south toward the Resonance Spire. The forest changed around them, the crystals taking on a reddish hue as they absorbed the light of the setting sun. The effect was beautiful, but unsettling, casting everything in a blood-tinged glow. "There," Sireya said after nearly an hour of careful progress. She pointed to a towering formation ahead, different from the others. While most of the crystal structures grew in organic, twisting patterns, this one rose in a perfect spiral, its surface faceted to catch and redirect light. Even from a distance, Aiden could feel a subtle vibration emanating from it. "The Resonance Spire," she explained. "A natural amplifier of energy patterns. With its help, I can project a signal that will reach the temple, despite my weakened state. It'll also announce our position to everyone within range," Aiden cautioned. "A calculated risk," she acknowledged, "but we're running out of options." As they approached the spire, the vibration grew stronger, a sensation that Aiden felt not just physically, but somehow deeper, as if the crystal was resonating with something inside him. It was an odd, not entirely comfortable feeling. "You feel it," Soraya observed, noting his expression. "Most solid beings can't perceive the resonance without special equipment." "Lucky me," Aiden muttered, trying to ignore the strange sensation. "How does this work? What do you need me to do?" "Maintain a perimeter. This will take concentration, and I'll be vulnerable while projecting the signal." Aiden nodded, taking up a position that gave him a clear view of their surroundings, while Soraya approached the spire. She placed her hands against its surface, and immediately the crystal responded, its internal light pulsing in time with her own luminescence. For several minutes, nothing seemed to happen beyond this synchronized pulsing. Then, gradually, both the spire and Soraya began to glow more intensely. The vibration Aiden had been feeling increased, becoming almost painful in its intensity. Just as he was about to suggest they abort, a beam of concentrated light shot upward from the spire, piercing the darkening sky like a beacon. It held for perhaps 10 seconds before faltering, then collapsing entirely as Soraya stumbled back from the crystal, visibly drained. Aiden rushed to her side, supporting her as she swayed. "Did it work?" "Yes," she managed, her voice weak. "The signal was received. The Guardians will come." "How long?" "Hours, perhaps. Their methods of travel are unconventional." Before Aiden could ask for clarification, a new sound reached them, the distinctive whine of approaching aircraft, no longer trying to mask their presence. "They've spotted the signal," he realized. "We need to move. Now." But as he tried to help Soraya stand, she collapsed against him, her luminescence flickering alarmingly. "I can't," she admitted, the words clearly costing her pride. "The signal took everything I had left. I need time to recover." Aiden made a quick assessment of their situation. The approaching craft would be on them within minutes. They couldn't outrun their pursuers, not with Soraya in this condition. Fighting was an option, but his single energy pistol against what sounded like multiple craft and ground forces was suicide. That left one option: deception. "Can you mask your energy signature completely?" he asked. "Make yourself undetectable?" She nodded weakly. "For a short time, yes, it's painful, but possible." "Do it," he instructed, already scanning their surroundings. "I have a plan." The forest floor near the spire was littered with crystal fragments of various sizes. Aiden quickly gathered several that roughly matched Soraya's height, arranging them in a formation that, from a distance, and through scanning equipment disrupted by the forest, might register as two humanoid figures. "What are you doing?" Soraya asked, watching as he worked. "Creating decoys," he explained. "When they scan this area, they'll detect the residual energy from the spire and these crystal formations. With the forest's natural interference, it should be enough to confuse them temporarily." He helped her to a sheltered alcove, formed by several large crystal structures, concealed from aerial view. "Stay here. Mask your signature. Don't move unless I signal you, no matter what you hear." "Where are you going?" There was genuine concern in her voice. "To lay a false trail," he said simply. "And even the odds." Before she could protest, he was gone, moving quickly through the crystal formations. The sound of approaching craft was louder now, accompanied by the whine of energy weapons powering up. Aiden circled back toward their crash site, intentionally leaving signs of passage, broken crystal fragments, disturbed ground, even a piece of fabric torn from his sleeve. The trail led away from Soraya's hiding place, toward the ravine they'd identified earlier. As the first search craft appeared overhead, he ducked into cover, watching as they deployed scanning equipment. The craft hovered, its systems clearly struggling with the crystal forest's interference. After a moment, it moved on, following the false trail he'd created. Aiden smiled grimly. Phase 1 complete. Now for the more dangerous part. He made his way carefully toward where the first ground forces would likely deploy, using the growing darkness and his knowledge of their search patterns to anticipate their movements. Night had fallen fully now, and the crystal forest had transformed, just as Soraya had warned. The formations glowed from within, casting eerie, shifting patterns of light across the landscape. The vibration he'd felt earlier had become a constant, subtle pressure at the edge of his consciousness. Focus, he told himself. Ignore the distractions. He found what he was looking for near the edge of a small clearing. A 3-person search team, heavily armed with military-grade weapons that marked them as Syntheri Special Forces, not common mercenaries. They moved with professional precision, using handheld scanners to navigate the disruptive environment. Aiden studied their equipment, noting the distinctive design of their communications gear. Standard Syntheri military issue, which meant a centralized command structure. Take out their comms, and they'd be operating blind in unfamiliar territory. He waited until they'd split up slightly, each covering a different sector of the clearing. Then, using the glowing crystals for cover, he approached the soldier who'd moved furthest from his companions. The attack was swift and silent. A hand over the mouth to prevent any outcry, pressure on the carotid artery to cut off blood flow to the brain. And within seconds, the soldier slumped unconscious. Aiden lowered him gently to the ground, quickly appropriating his weapon, comm unit, and scanner. The weapon was a Synthori particle rifle, deadly, efficient, and unfortunately calibrated to Syntheri biology. The grip was wrong for human hands, the balance off, but it would serve his purposes. Next, he accessed the comm unit, listening to the chatter between search teams. The language was Syntheri military code, but Aiden had enough experience with their tactics to get the gist. They detected the energy signature from the resonant spire and were converging on the area. But the crystal forest was playing havoc with their equipment. Multiple false readings had them spreading their forces thin. Good. Confusion worked in his favor. Using the soldier's scanner, he located the nearest power source for their communications network, a portable relay station set up about half a kilometer away. Disable that, and this entire sector of the search grid would be cut off from Central Command. Moving with practiced stealth, Aiden made his way toward the relay station, using the increasingly bizarre light patterns of the crystal forest to his advantage. The hallucinations Soraya had mentioned were beginning to manifest, peripheral movements that vanished when he looked directly at them, whispers that seemed to come from the crystals themselves. He forced himself to ignore them, focusing on the mission. The relay station was guarded by 2 soldiers, both alert and well-positioned. A direct assault would be risky. Instead, Aiden circled to where a particularly large crystal formation created a blind spot in their perimeter. Using the appropriated particle rifle, he fired a single shot at a distant cluster of crystals. The effect was more dramatic than he'd anticipated. The crystal shattered with a sound like breaking glass, but multiplied 100-fold, echoing through the forest. Both guards immediately turned toward the disturbance, weapons raised. Aiden moved quickly, using their momentary distraction to approach the relay station. He placed a small charge, a simple detonator fashioned from components in his emergency kit, directly on the power core. Not enough to create a large explosion, but sufficient to disable the equipment. He retreated to a safe distance, then triggered the charge. The resulting pop was relatively quiet, but the effect was immediate. The relay station's lights flickered and died, and the comm unit he'd taken from the soldier went silent. Phase 2 complete. Now to get back to Soraya before the search teams regrouped. But as he turned to leave, a new sound reached him, the distinctive hum of an energy blade activating. He spun to find himself face to face with a Syntheri warrior, unlike the others. This one wore the distinctive armor of a commander, with insignia that marked him as part of Lord Halvex's personal guard. Human, the commander hissed, his reptilian features twisting into what might have been a smile. Lord Halvex will be pleased when I bring him your head. Aiden raised the particle rifle, But the Centauri moved with blinding speed, knocking the weapon aside before Aiden could fire. The energy blade hummed as it sliced through the air, missing Aiden's throat by centimeters as he jerked backward. The fight was brutal and swift. The Centauri had superior strength and reflexes, but Aiden had years of combat experience against non-human opponents. He used the environment to his advantage, maneuvering so that the glowing crystals disrupted the Centauri's night vision. A strike to the commander's throat, a kick to destabilize his stance. But the Centauri recovered quickly, the energy blade slicing across Aiden's side, burning through fabric and searing flesh. Pain lanced through him, but adrenaline kept him moving. The crystal forest seemed to respond to the violence, the light patterns intensifying, the strange whispers growing louder, disorienting. But Aiden forced himself to focus on his opponent. The decisive moment came when the Centauri lunged forward, overextending slightly. Aiden sidestepped, grabbed the commander's arm, and used his own momentum to drive the energy blade into the Centauri's chest. There was a moment of resistance. Then the blade penetrated armor and flesh, the energy field disrupting the commander's internal organs. The Centauri collapsed, the light fading from his reptilian eyes. Aiden retrieved the energy blade, a far more useful weapon than the unwieldy particle rifle. Only then did he allow himself to acknowledge the wound in his side. Painful, but not immediately life-threatening. The energy blade had cauterized as it cut. He tore a strip from his sleeve, binding the wound as best he could. Then, fighting through the pain and the increasingly disorienting effects of the crystal forest at night, he began making his way back to where he'd left Soraya. The journey seemed longer than it should have been, the crystal formations shifting in ways that defied logic. More than once, Aiden found himself unsure of his direction, the landmarks appearing different in the pulsating light. The whispers had become more distinct, sometimes seeming to form words in languages he didn't recognize. When he finally reached the resonance spire, he was alarmed to find the alcove where he'd hidden Soraya empty. Had she been discovered? Had she fled, thinking he wasn't coming back? "Soraya," he called softly, scanning the area for any sign of her. A flutter of movement caught his eye, a subtle shift in the light patterns of a nearby crystal formation. As he watched, the pattern coalesced into a vaguely humanoid shape, then resolved further into a recognizable form. Soraya stepped forward, her luminescence no longer suppressed, but still weaker than normal. "Aiden," she said, relief evident in her voice. "You're injured." "It's nothing," he assured her, though the pain in his side suggested otherwise. "We need to move. I've disabled one of their relay stations, but they'll adapt quickly." She approached him, concern in her silver eyes. "Let me see." Before he could protest, she gently moved his makeshift bandage aside, examining the wound. Then, to his surprise, she placed her hand directly over it. Her luminescence intensified, focusing around her palm, and Aiden felt a strange sensation. Not exactly painful, but intense, as if his cells were being rearranged at a fundamental level. When she removed her hand, the wound had closed, leaving only a faint scar and a lingering warmth. "How did you—" he began, astonished. "Energy manipulation," she explained, though the effort had clearly cost her. Her luminescence dimmed noticeably. "Basic cellular regeneration. It's not something we do lightly." "Why not?" She hesitated, her expression complex. "Because it requires giving a part of one's own life energy to another. It's considered intimate, sacred, even." The implications of what she'd done settled over Aiden like a physical weight. "You shouldn't have." "You were injured helping me," she interrupted. "It was my choice to make." Before he could respond, a distant explosion shattered the moment. The search teams were getting closer, likely responding to the loss of their relay station. "We need to keep moving," Aiden insisted, pushing aside the questions her actions had raised. "Can you walk?" "Better than before," she confirmed. "The forest is helping me recover, and—" she hesitated. "The energy transfer seems to have stabilized my patterns somewhat." They set off again, heading deeper into the crystal forest, toward where Soraya believed the temple of ancestral light stood. The night had deepened around them, and the forest had become a phantasmagoria of light and sound. Crystals pulsed with internal radiance, casting sheets of color across their path. The whispers had become a constant backdrop, sometimes rising to a chorus that seemed almost musical. "What are they saying?" Aiden asked, gesturing to the crystals around them. "The voices." "You can hear them?" Soraya sounded surprised. "Most solid beings can't, not without years of training. Since we entered the forest, at first it was just a feeling. But now—" He trailed off, unsure how to describe the sensation. Soraya studied him with new interest. "They're not exactly saying anything. It's more resonance. Emotional and energetic patterns stored within the crystal matrix. Echoes of those who have passed through before. It's getting more intense." "We're approaching the temple," she confirmed. "The crystal density increases as we get closer to the heart of the forest. And night is when the boundary between energy and matter is thinnest." As if to confirm her words, Aiden began to see not just light patterns, but actual figures. Translucent, shifting forms that moved among the crystal formations. They resembled Soraya's species, but more ethereal, less defined. "What are those?" he asked, keeping his voice low despite the certainty that whatever they were, they already knew of their presence. "Ancestral echoes," Soraya replied with reverence. "Energy patterns of my ancestors, preserved within the crystal matrix. Not conscious entities, exactly, but memories, impressions." The figures seemed to take note of them, gathering closer, their luminescence pulsing in patterns that reminded Aiden of Soraya's own. One approached Soraya directly, its form shimmering as it reached toward her. Rather than recoiling, she extended her hand, allowing the apparition to touch her. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Soraya's own luminescence flared brightly, and for a moment, the two patterns synchronized, creating a dazzling display of light and color. Then, the ancestral echo withdrew, seeming satisfied, and rejoined its fellows. "What was that?" Aiden asked, fascinated despite their dire situation. "Recognition," Soraya explained, her voice stronger than it had been since the crash. "The ancestors acknowledge me as one of their line. It's affirming." One of the echoes approached Aiden next, its formless features studying him with what felt like curiosity. Unlike its interaction with Soraya, it maintained a distance, circling him slowly. "They're interested in you," Soraya observed. "That's unusual. They typically ignore solid beings entirely." Before Aiden could respond, the echo made a gesture, a complex pattern of light that seemed directed at both him and Soraya. Then it withdrew, rejoining the others, which were now moving with purpose toward a specific point deeper in the forest. "They want us to follow," Soraya interpreted, already moving in the direction the echoes had indicated. "They're leading us to the temple." "Can we trust them?" Aiden asked, even as he fell into step beside her. "They have no agenda as we understand it," she assured him. "They exist in a state beyond our concerns, but they recognize the bloodline of the Empress, and they understand when that bloodline is threatened." They followed the ancestral echoes through increasingly dense crystal formations, the light patterns growing more complex and beautiful with each step. Despite the wound that no longer pained him and the pursuers who still hunted them, Aiden found himself moved by the alien majesty of this place. It was like nothing he had ever experienced, not just visually stunning, but somehow nourishing to something deep within him he hadn't known was hungry. Finally, they emerged into a vast clearing, and Aiden's breath caught in his throat. Before them stood the Temple of Ancestral Light, not a building as humans would understand it, but a massive crystalline structure that seemed to have grown organically from the forest floor. It rose hundreds of meters into the night sky, its countless facets capturing and amplifying the light of the stars above. The entire structure pulsed with internal radiance, creating patterns so complex they seemed almost alive. At the base of the temple, a series of smaller crystal formations created what appeared to be an entrance, an archway of light leading into the heart of the structure. "We made it," Soraya said, her voice filled with wonder and relief. "The temple will provide sanctuary. No violence can occur within its boundaries. It's one of the fundamental laws of Ilan Va, enforced by the crystal matrix itself." As they approached the entrance, the ancestral echoes that had guided them dispersed, their purpose fulfilled. But before Aiden and Soraya could reach the sanctuary of the temple, a new sound reached them, the whine of approaching craft, much closer than before. "They've found us," Aiden realized, his hand going to the energy blade he'd taken from the Centauri commander. "We need to get inside, now." They ran for the entrance, the temple's light seeming to reach out to welcome them. But just as they reached the archway, the air above the clearing filled with the ominous shapes of Centauri vessels, their searchlights cutting through the darkness to illuminate the temple entrance. "Empress Soraya!" a voice boomed from the lead vessel, amplified to carry across the clearing. "By order of the Coalition of Concerned Species, you will surrender yourself for escort back to Zalthion space." Soraya paused at the temple threshold, her expression hardening. The Coalition of Concerned Species, a convenient name for a group of rejected suitors. Aiden positioned himself protectively in front of her, the energy blade humming in his hand. "Get inside. I'll hold them off." "No," she replied firmly, placing a hand on his arm. "The temple's sanctuary extends several meters beyond the entrance. If we cross that threshold together, they cannot follow with weapons." As she spoke, the lead vessel descended, landing at the edge of the clearing. A ramp extended, and from it emerged a familiar figure, Lord Halvex, flanked by heavily armed Centauri guards. "Empress Soraya," Halvex called, his reptilian features arranged in a mockery of diplomacy. "This needn't end in bloodshed. The Coalition simply wishes to renegotiate the terms of succession." "There is nothing to negotiate, Lord Halvex," Soraya replied, her voice carrying the full authority of her position despite their desperate situation. "The laws of succession have stood for millennia. They will not be changed because of wounded pride." Halvex's expression hardened. "Pride? You speak to me of pride? For 3 centuries, you have denied every worthy suitor, placing your personal preferences above the needs of the Empire. The Coalition has determined that such selfishness cannot continue." More vessels were landing now, disgorging troops that quickly formed a perimeter around the temple entrance. Aiden counted at least 30 heavily armed soldiers, with more arriving by the moment. "We're out of time," he muttered to Soraya. "Whatever plan you have, now's the moment." She nodded, almost imperceptibly, then addressed Halvex again. "The Temple of Ancestral Light is sacred ground, Lord Halvex. To bring weapons here is a violation of the most ancient laws of Ilan Va." "We respect the traditions of Ilan Va," Halvex replied smoothly. "But our concern is for the security of the Zalthion Empire. Surely you understand that your unusual behavior has created instability that threatens billions of lives." As he spoke, Halvex advanced slowly, his guards moving with him. They were attempting to cut off access to the temple entrance. Aiden realized, once surrounded, even the sanctuary of the temple might not save them. "Now," he whispered urgently to Soraya. She nodded, then raised her hands in what appeared to be a gesture of surrender. But instead of yielding, her luminescence suddenly flared brilliantly, bright enough to momentarily blind those watching. In that instant of confusion, She grabbed Aiden's hand and pulled him backward through the temple entrance. The moment they crossed the threshold, a shimmering barrier of energy sprang into existence, separating them from their pursuers. Halvex roared in anger, ordering his troops to fire, but their energy weapons dissipated harmlessly against the barrier. "What did you do?" Aiden asked, impressed despite himself. "I activated the temple's defense protocols," Soraya explained, her luminescence still pulsing with exertion. "As the rightful Empress, my energy signature is recognized by the crystal matrix. The barrier will hold them indefinitely." Inside the temple, the environment was even more extraordinary than the forest outside. The walls, floor, and ceiling were formed of living crystal that pulsed with internal light, creating patterns that responded to their presence. The air itself seemed charged with energy, making Aiden's skin tingle. "This way," Soraya directed, leading him deeper into the structure. The heart of the temple contains a communication array that can penetrate the crystal forest's disruption. We can contact loyal Imperial forces. As they moved through the temple's twisting corridors, Aiden noticed that Soraya's luminescence was growing stronger, more vibrant. The environment seemed to nourish her in some fundamental way. "You're looking better," he observed. "The temple resonates with my energy patterns," she confirmed. "It's rejuvenating." They entered a vast central chamber, dominated by a massive crystal formation that rose from floor to ceiling like a living pillar of light. Smaller crystals orbited it slowly, creating a mesmerizing dance of illumination. "The heart of remembrance," Soraya said reverently. "The most sacred place on Ilan Va. Here, the memories of all empresses who came before me are preserved." She approached the central pillar, placing her hands against its surface. Immediately, the crystal responded, its internal light synchronizing with her luminescence. The orbiting crystals accelerated their movement, their light intensifying. "I am Soraya, Empress of the Zalthian Empire, blood of the ancestral line," she intoned formally. "I seek the wisdom of those who came before, and the protection of the guardians." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, gradually, the central pillar began to emit a low, resonant tone that Aiden felt more than heard. The orbiting crystals moved faster, their light trails creating complex patterns in the air. Suddenly, the chamber was no longer empty. Translucent figures had appeared, similar to the ancestral echoes in the forest, but far more defined, almost solid in appearance. They surrounded Soraya and Aiden, their luminescence pulsing in patterns that seemed like communication. "The Guardians," Soraya explained softly. "Ancient members of my species who chose to transcend physical form entirely, becoming pure energy beings. They maintain the temple and preserve our history." One of the Guardians approached Soraya directly, its form more defined than the others. It made a complex gesture with appendages that weren't quite hands, creating a pattern of light that Soraya seemed to understand. "Yes," she responded to the unheard communication. "The Empire is threatened from within. Lord Halvex leads a coalition of rejected suitors who seek to force my hand in choosing a consort." The Guardian's form shifted, its luminescence changing patterns rapidly. "No," Soraya replied, her expression troubled. "That's not possible. Lysian has been my most trusted advisor for centuries. He couldn't be involved." Aiden watched the exchange with growing unease. "What are they saying?" Soraya turned to him, her silver eyes wide with shock. "They say the attack was orchestrated not just by Halvex, but by my chief advisor, Lysian. He believes I've become too isolated, too removed from the needs of the Empire. He arranged this crisis to force me back to Zalthian Prime and into choosing a consort." "Your own advisor betrayed you?" Aiden shook his head in disbelief. "Why would he take such a risk?" Before Soraya could respond, another Guardian approached, this one directing its attention to Aiden. It circled him slowly, its luminescence pulsing in a pattern different from its communication with Soraya. "What does it want with me?" Aiden asked, uncomfortable under the ethereal being's scrutiny. "It's curious," Soraya translated, watching the interaction with evident surprise. "It says your energy pattern is unusual for a human. There are resonances it recognizes." The Guardian made another series of light patterns, more complex than before. Soraya's expression shifted from surprise to shock. "What?" Aiden pressed. "What is it saying?" Soraya hesitated, clearly struggling with how to convey the information. "It says you carry traces of energy patterns similar to my species. Not just similar, specifically matching the royal bloodline." "That's impossible," Aiden protested. "I'm human, fully human." "The Guardians don't make mistakes about energy patterns," Soraya said quietly. "They're asking if you know about Project Genesis." The name triggered something in Aiden's memory, a fragment of conversation overheard years ago during his military service, quickly hushed when his presence was noticed. Project Genesis was a human initiative, wasn't it? Something classified from before the Galactic Accords. "It was more than that," Soraya said, her voice heavy with what sounded like regret. "It was an attempt by human scientists to create hybrids between our species, to combine human adaptability with Zoltheon energy manipulation." "That's," Aiden began, but was interrupted as the chamber suddenly reverberated with a massive impact. The crystal walls trembled, and dust sifted down from above. "They're attacking the temple," he realized, military instincts taking over. "They must have brought in heavier weapons." Another impact shook the chamber, stronger than the first. The Guardians' forms wavered, their patterns becoming erratic. "The temple's defenses are strong, but not invulnerable," Soraya said urgently. "Especially against weapons that shouldn't exist in this sector of space." "What kind of weapons?" "Harmonic disruptors. They're specifically designed to destabilize energy patterns, lethal to my species, and devastating to crystal structures like the temple." A third impact rocked the chamber, and this time cracks appeared in the walls, spiderwebbing across the living crystal. "We need to get out of here," Aiden decided, already scanning for alternative exits. "Is there another way out of the temple?" Soraya conferred briefly with the Guardians, their light patterns increasingly agitated. "There's an ancient passage that leads to a secondary temple complex, deeper in the forest. The Guardians can guide us there." "Then let's move," Aiden urged, the soldier in him taking command, "before they breach the outer defenses." As they prepared to leave, the Guardian that had identified Aiden's unusual energy pattern approached him once more. It extended what might have been a hand, offering what appeared to be a small crystal, no larger than a human thumb. "What is it?" Aiden asked, hesitating to take it. "A memory crystal," Soraya explained, her expression solemn. "It contains information they believe you should have. About Project Genesis. About your origins." Aiden stared at the crystal, a sense of foreboding washing over him. Did he want to know? Could he bear to learn that everything he believed about himself might be a lie? Another impact shook the chamber, larger than before. Pieces of crystal began to fall from the ceiling. The decision had to be made now. With a decisive motion, Aiden took the crystal, tucking it securely into a pocket. "Let's go. We can deal with ancient history after we survive the present." The Guardians led them through a hidden passage that opened in the chamber floor, descending deep beneath the temple. The crystal formations here were older, their light patterns more subdued, but somehow more complex. They moved quickly, the sounds of destruction growing fainter as they put distance between themselves and their pursuers. "How far to this secondary temple?" Aiden asked, as they navigated the twisting passages. "Several kilometers," Soraya replied. "The passage follows natural crystal veins beneath the forest floor. It should lead us beyond Halvex's search perimeter." As they progressed, Aiden noticed that Soraya's movements were becoming labored, her luminescence fluctuating in a way he hadn't seen before. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I'm experiencing the beginning of a transformation cycle," she admitted reluctantly. "It's a natural process for my species, but the timing is inconvenient." "A transformation cycle?" "Every few centuries, we undergo a period of renewal. Our energy patterns realign, strengthen. It's normally a carefully managed process, conducted in specialized chambers over several days." She paused, steadying herself against a crystal formation. "In the wild, so to speak, it's more unpredictable." "Will you be able to continue?" Aiden asked, his concern deepening. "I have to," she said simply. "But I'll need your help. The process makes me vulnerable, especially in its final stages." Before Aiden could respond, one of the guardians leading them made an urgent light pattern. Soraya tensed, interpreting the warning. "They've detected movement ahead," she translated. "Someone else is in the passages." Aiden drew the energy blade he'd taken from the Syntheri commander, its hum echoing softly off the crystal walls. "Stay behind me." They advanced more cautiously now, the guardians spreading out to scout ahead. The passage widened into a small chamber where several crystal veins converged, creating a natural nexus point. And waiting for them, seated calmly on a crystal outcropping, was an elderly Zolthian male whose luminescence pulsed with a steady, controlled rhythm. "Lycian," Soraya breathed, shock and betrayal evident in her voice. The old advisor rose, his expression serene despite the circumstances. "My Empress, I'm relieved to find you unharmed." Aiden kept the energy blade raised, positioning himself protectively between Soraya and her advisor. "You have a strange way of showing concern, setting up an ambush, coordinating with Halvex." "Necessary measures," Lycian interrupted, his tone maddeningly reasonable. "The Empire requires stability. The Empress requires a consort. 3 centuries of indecision have weakened us politically and militarily." "So you orchestrated this entire crisis?" Soraya demanded, her luminescence flaring with anger. "Put countless lives at risk? Violated the sacred ground of Elanva?" "Extreme problems require extreme solutions," Lycian replied, unperturbed by her anger. "You left me no choice. Your radiance, your continued refusal to choose a consort, has created factions within the imperial court, destabilized our alliances, and emboldened our enemies." "That was not your decision to make," Soraya countered, her voice cold with imperial authority. "Someone had to make it," the old advisor insisted. "For 3 centuries, you've rejected every suitable candidate. The bloodline must continue. The Empire must have certainty. And you thought forcing my hand was the answer?" Soraya's luminescence pulsed with a mixture of anger and hurt. "You, who I trusted above all others." Lycian's expression softened, genuine regret showing through his composure. "I have served you and the Empire faithfully for 5 centuries. Your radiance. Everything I've done has been in service to both, including this regrettable deception." Aiden kept the energy blade trained on the advisor, but his tactical mind was working overtime. "You didn't expect Halvex to go this far, did you? Using harmonic disruptors against the temple? That crossed a line even for you." Lycian's composure cracked slightly, confirming Aiden's suspicion. "Lord Halvex has exceeded the parameters of our arrangement. The harmonic disruptors were explicitly forbidden. The temple's sanctity was to be preserved at all costs." "You lost control of your co-conspirator," Aiden concluded. "Amateur mistake." "Perhaps," Lycian acknowledged with surprising humility. "But the underlying necessity remains. The Empress must choose a consort. The bloodline must continue." Soraya stepped forward, her anger giving way to a deeper emotion, disappointment. "Did it ever occur to you that I might have reasons beyond mere indecision? That perhaps none of the candidates were truly suitable for the role? With respect, your radiance, 3,000 species, 10,000 of the most accomplished individuals in the galaxy, surely one would suffice. None of them saw me, Soraya said quietly, echoing words she'd spoken to Aiden days earlier. They saw the throne, the power, the prestige, not the person who bears them. Lysian's expression softened further. And this human security contractor does? After mere days in your company? Soraya's luminescence shifted, taking on a warmer hue. He sees a person making difficult choices, not an institution to be maintained or a prize to be won. He risked his life not for the Empress of Zoltheon, but for Soraya. The old advisor studied Aiden with new interest, his ancient eyes seeing more than was comfortable. Perhaps he does, but that doesn't solve the problem of succession. The royal bloodline must continue, or the empire will fracture. That is not political theory. It is historical certainty. Before Soraya could respond, her luminescence suddenly flared, then dimmed dramatically. She swayed, and Aiden moved quickly to support her. The transformation cycle, Lysian recognized immediately, his expression shifting to concern. It's accelerating. She needs a stabilization chamber or what? Aiden demanded, still supporting Soraya as her luminescence continued to fluctuate alarmingly. Or the process could become dangerous, the advisor explained grimly. In the wild, so to speak, transformation cycles can be unpredictable, potentially fatal. Is there a stabilization chamber in this secondary temple we're heading toward? Lysian shook his head. No. The only one on Elon Va is in the main temple, which Halvex is currently destroying. Aiden made a quick decision. Then we need to get her somewhere safe and defensible until the cycle completes naturally. How long does it take? Without technological assistance, 12 to 14 hours. But she'll be extremely vulnerable for most of that time. The crystal heart, Soraya managed weakly, her voice strained. The secondary temple has a crystal heart, not as powerful as a stabilization chamber, but it might help. Lysian nodded in agreement. Yes, that could work. The natural resonance might help guide the transformation. Aiden looked between them, calculating their options. Can we trust you, Lysian? Because if this is another trap, my loyalty has always been to the Empress. The old advisor interrupted. My methods were extreme. Yes, but my goal was her welfare and that of the Empire. I will help you reach the secondary temple. Another decision point. Trust the architect of their current crisis, or go it alone in unfamiliar territory, with Soraya rapidly weakening. Fine, Aiden decided. But one wrong move, and I'll finish what Halvex started. Lysian accepted the threat with a dignified nod. Understood. Now, we should hurry. The transformation cycle waits for no one, not even an Empress. With Lysian's help and the continued guidance of the Guardians, they made faster progress through the crystal passages. Soraya's condition continued to deteriorate, her luminescence fluctuating between intense flares and concerning dimness. By the time they reached a junction that Lysian identified as near the secondary temple, she could barely walk, leaning heavily on Aiden for support. We're close, Lysian assured them, his ancient eyes concerned as he observed Soraya's condition. The crystal heart is just beyond this chamber. The chamber he indicated was larger than the passages they'd been traversing, with a high ceiling supported by natural crystal columns. Unlike the main temple, this area felt older, less maintained, with a wild beauty that spoke of natural growth rather than deliberate design. As they entered, Aiden's combat instincts flared in warning. The space was too open, too exposed after the confined passages they'd been traveling through. A perfect place for an ambush. He was right. Hold, came a cold, reptilian voice from the shadows. Lord Halvex stepped into view, flanked by a dozen heavily armed Syntheri soldiers. How predictable you've become. Old friend. Lysian stiffened beside them. Halvex, how did you find this place? Did you really think I wouldn't have you monitored? Halvex replied, his tone mocking. Every communication, every movement. I've known about your contingency plans for months. Aiden positioned himself protectively in front of Soraya, the energy blade humming to life in his hand. The odds were terrible. 12 trained soldiers against one human, an elderly advisor, and an Empress in the midst of a debilitating transformation cycle. The harmonic disruptors were explicitly forbidden, Lysian said, genuine anger breaking through his usual composure. The temple is sacred ground. Sacred ground, Halvex scoffed. Outdated superstition. The galaxy moves forward. Old one. Power is what matters now, not tradition. Soraya straightened, despite her weakened state. Her luminescence stabilizing momentarily through sheer force of will. Is that what this is about, Lord Halvex? Power? Not the continuation of the bloodline, or the stability of the Empire, but your own ambition? Why separate them? Halvex countered smoothly. The Empire needs strong leadership. I provide that strength. The bloodline continues through our union. Everyone benefits. Everyone except the billion citizens who would suffer under your rule, Soraya replied, her voice carrying the weight of imperial authority despite her physical weakness. I've seen your methods, your disregard for life and tradition. You would transform the Zolthian Empire into a military dictatorship within a generation. Halvex's reptilian features twisted into what might have been a smile. Perhaps, but you'll not be alive to witness it. He gestured to his soldiers. Take the Empress. Kill the others. The soldiers advanced, weapons raised. Aiden moved to engage, knowing he was hopelessly outnumbered, but determined to buy Soraya as much time as possible. What happened next would be debated in historical accounts for centuries to come. As the first soldier came within range, Soraya's luminescence suddenly flared with blinding intensity. Her form seemed to shift, becoming less solid, more energy than matter. The transformation cycle had reached a critical point, accelerated by the stress of the situation. "Aiden," she gasped, her voice distorted by the energy coursing through her. "The crystal heart. I need the crystal heart." Understanding immediately, Aiden began fighting his way toward the chamber Lysian had indicated, clearing a path for Soraya to follow. The Centauri soldiers, momentarily disoriented by her transformation, recovered quickly and pressed their attack. The battle was brutal and swift. Aiden's military training served him well, but he was facing overwhelming odds. A plasma shot grazed his shoulder, searing flesh and bringing a hiss of pain. Another burned across his thigh as he dove to avoid a more lethal hit. Lysian, surprisingly, joined the fight. Despite his age, the old advisor moved with unexpected grace, using his own energy manipulation abilities to disrupt the Centauri weapons. But he too was quickly overwhelmed, a direct hit to his chest, sending him crumpling to the ground, his luminescence flickering weakly. Halvex watched the battle with cold satisfaction, certain of his victory. He approached Soraya, who had collapsed against a crystal formation, her transformation consuming her strength. "It's over, Empress," he said, reaching for her with a clawed hand. "Accept your defeat with dignity." But as his hand neared her glowing form, Soraya's luminescence suddenly pulsed with renewed intensity. She looked past Halvex to where Aiden fought desperately against the remaining soldiers, blood streaming from multiple wounds. In that moment, something changed. Thousands of years of imperial protocol, centuries of emotional distance, all gave way to a simpler, more primal emotion. Fear, not for herself, but for another. With a cry that was both physical and energetic, Soraya released a pulse of pure energy that radiated outward like a shockwave. It passed harmlessly through Aiden, but struck the Centauri with devastating effect, disrupting their neural patterns and sending them collapsing to the ground. Halvex, partially shielded by some personal technology, staggered but remained standing, his reptilian features contorted with rage and disbelief. "Impossible!" he hissed. "You can't. The laws of your species forbid." "The laws forbid using our energy to harm," Soraya agreed, her voice distorted by her transformation, but gaining strength. "But they don't forbid using it to protect." Another pulse emanated from her, stronger than the first, focused entirely on Halvex. The Centauri Lord screamed as his protective technology overloaded, leaving him vulnerable to the full force of Soraya's energy. He collapsed, unconscious but alive, a final mercy from an Empress who, even now, refused to take life unnecessarily. The chamber fell silent, save for Aiden's labored breathing as he limped to Soraya's side. Her form was barely recognizable now, more energy than matter, her luminescence shifting through patterns too complex for human eyes to fully comprehend. "Soraya," he managed, dropping to his knees beside her glowing form. "Are you—" "The Crystal Heart," she interrupted, her voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Now, please." With her guidance, Aiden helped her into the adjacent chamber, where a massive crystal formation pulsed with ancient power. Unlike the Heart of Remembrance in the main temple, this one was unrefined, wild, a natural growth rather than a cultivated structure. Soraya moved toward it, her semi-energy form already responding to its resonance. As she made contact with the crystal, her luminescence synchronized with its internal patterns, creating a dazzling display of light and color that filled the chamber. "What now?" Aiden asked, keeping a wary eye on the entrance in case any of Halvex's forces recovered. "Now, I complete the transformation," Soraya replied, her voice stronger but still distorted. "It will take time, hours. You should rest, heal." But Aiden shook his head, taking up a defensive position near the entrance. "I'll stand guard. We don't know if Halvex has more forces searching for us." "Always the protector," she observed, a hint of affection in her otherworldly voice. "But you're injured, severely." "I've had worse." "Have you?" There was genuine curiosity in her tone, even as her form continued to shift and change within the crystal's embrace. "Proxima Centauri 4, he admitted after a moment. "After the explosion, 3 days in a field hospital with a punctured lung and internal bleeding. Plenty of time to think about those 347 civilians." Soraya was quiet for a moment, her luminescence pulsing in rhythm with the Crystal Heart. "You still carry that burden." "Always will." "Perhaps," her voice softened, "but perhaps there's room for more than just burden in a life, even yours." Before Aiden could respond, a movement at the entrance caught his attention. He raised the energy blade, ready to defend against a new threat. But it was only Lysian, limping into the chamber with one hand pressed to his wounded chest. "The Centauri are unconscious, but not dead," the old advisor reported, his voice weak but steady. "They'll recover eventually. We should prepare." "How long do we have?" Aiden asked, automatically shifting to tactical assessment. "Hours, perhaps. Their neural systems will need time to reset after that energy pulse." Lysian looked at Soraya with newfound respect. "I've never seen anything like it. Using life energy to protect rather than harm, it's unprecedented." "She's unprecedented," Aiden said simply, and there was something in his tone that made the old advisor study him with new interest. "Yes," Lysian agreed after a moment. "She is." He moved further into the chamber, settling heavily onto a crystal outcropping. "Which is why I've spent centuries trying to ensure her legacy continues." "Through a forced marriage to someone like Halvex?" Aiden's tone was skeptical. "No," Lysian sighed, genuine regret in his voice. "That was a miscalculation. I believed I could control him, use his ambition to force a decision without actual harm coming to the Empress. I was wrong." "Spectacularly wrong," Aiden agreed. "Yes. The old advisor's luminescence dimmed with shame. But the underlying problem remains. The royal bloodline must continue, or the empire will fracture. That is historical fact, not political theory. Aidan was silent for a moment, his hand unconsciously moving to the pocket where he'd stored the memory crystal given to him by the Guardian. "What do you know about Project Genesis?" he asked suddenly. Lycian's ancient eyes widened in surprise. "How do you know that name?" "The Guardians. They said—" Aidan hesitated, still struggling with the implications. "They said, I carry energy patterns similar to the royal bloodline, that I might be connected to Project Genesis." The old advisor studied him intently, his luminescence pulsing with what might have been recognition. Project Genesis was initiated nearly a century ago, during the early diplomatic exchanges between humans and the Zoltheon Empire. It was an attempt to create hybrids, beings with human adaptability and Zoltheon energy manipulation capabilities. "Human experimentation," Aidan said flatly. "Voluntary genetic modification," Lycian corrected. "The participants were willing, eager, even. The project was seen as a potential bridge between our species, a new evolution that might benefit both." "What happened?" "Politics," Lycian said simply. "The traditionalists in the imperial court feared dilution of the bloodline. The human authorities feared creating a subspecies they couldn't control. The project was officially terminated after less than a decade." "Officially?" Aidan repeated, noting the qualification. "Yes." Lycian's expression turned thoughtful. "There were rumors that some of the research continued in secret, that a few viable embryos were successfully created and brought to term." "You're saying I might be one of those embryos? A human Zoltheon hybrid?" The idea was so foreign, so contrary to everything Aidan had believed about himself, that he could barely process it. "It would explain why the Guardians recognized royal bloodline patterns in your energy signature," Lycian mused. "And perhaps why you've been drawn to protect the Empress with such dedication." From within the crystal heart, Soraya's voice emerged, stronger now as her transformation progressed. "It would also explain why I felt such immediate recognition when we met. A resonance I couldn't explain." Aidan shook his head, still struggling with the implications. "I can't—" He broke off, unable to articulate the turmoil of emotions the revelation had triggered. "The memory crystal," Soraya suggested gently. "The one the Guardian gave you. It might contain answers." With reluctant fingers, Aidan withdrew the small crystal from his pocket. It pulsed with a soft, internal light, responding to his touch in a way that suddenly seemed less strange than it should have. "How do I access it?" he asked, turning the crystal in his hand. "Simply hold it and focus your thoughts on what you wish to know," Lycian instructed. "If you truly carry Zoltheon energy patterns, the crystal should respond." Feeling somewhat foolish but desperate for answers, Aidan closed his fingers around the crystal and concentrated. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, gradually, the crystal began to warm in his hand, its internal light intensifying. And suddenly, Aidan wasn't in the chamber anymore. Or rather, he was. But his consciousness had expanded beyond it, into a space where memory and energy intertwined. Images flashed before him: clinical laboratories, serious-faced scientists, genetic sequences displayed on holographic screens, and faces. Human faces, filled with hope and determination. Zoltheon faces glowing with cautious optimism. A specific memory crystallized with startling clarity. A human woman, her face tired but resolute, cradling a newborn infant. Beside her stood a Zoltheon male, his luminescence pulsing with what could only be described as pride. "He's perfect," the woman whispered. "Our little bridge between worlds." The Zoltheon placed a gentle hand on the infant's head, and his luminescence synchronized briefly with a barely perceptible glow emanating from the child's skin. Project Genesis's greatest success, he agreed, and its most carefully guarded secret. More images followed rapidly, the child growing, displaying unusual abilities, concerning the scientists, urgent conversations about security, about protection, a decision made in haste and fear. He must be hidden, a voice insisted. If either government learns of his existence, he'll become a laboratory specimen, or worse, a human military officer, his face grim but determined. I can place him with a family in the colonies. Good people. They'll raise him as their own, never knowing his origin. The Zolthian scientist, reluctant, but seeing no alternative. His energy abilities should remain dormant without training. He'll appear fully human. And if they manifest later, the military officer asked. Then fate will have to guide him, the scientist replied. We've done all we can. A final image. The infant being handed to a young couple on a frontier world. Their faces alight with joy at the child they'd been told was an orphan from the war zones. They named him Aiden, after the husband's father. The memory faded, and Aiden returned to himself with a gasp, the crystal cooling in his hand. He looked up to find both Lycian and Soraya watching him intently from their respective positions. You saw, Soraya said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Aiden's voice was hoarse with emotion. I'm not who I thought I was. You're exactly who you've always been, Soraya countered gently. This knowledge doesn't change the person you are, only your understanding of how you came to be. She's right, Lycian added, surprising Aiden with his support. Your actions, your choices, those define you far more than your genetic origin. Aiden sat heavily on a crystal outcropping. The energy blade deactivated and set aside as he tried to process this fundamental shift in his sense of self. All his life, he'd believed himself to be fully human, a colonial orphan adopted during the chaos of the border conflicts. Yes, but still entirely human. To learn now that he was something else, something potentially unique in the galaxy. If this is true, he said finally, if I really am part Zolthian, what does that mean? Practically speaking? It means you have capabilities you've never explored, Lycian replied thoughtfully. Energy manipulation abilities that have remained dormant without proper training. It might explain your unusual resilience, your adaptability in crisis situations. It means you're a bridge, Soraya added, her voice stronger now as her transformation continued within the crystal heart. Not just between species, but between worldviews. You understand humanity's drive, its passion, its adaptability, but you also carry within you the potential for Zolthian perspective, the longer view, the deeper connection to energy patterns. Aiden considered this, still struggling with the implications. And the royal bloodline connection? The Guardians seemed certain about that. Lycian and Soraya exchanged a significant look, communicating in that silent way her species sometimes did. The scientists who contributed genetic material to Project Genesis were carefully selected. Lycian explained carefully. The Zolthian contributors were all from lineages close to the royal bloodline, to maximize the potential for energy manipulation abilities. How close? Aiden pressed, sensing there was more to it than the old advisor was saying. Soraya answered from within the crystal heart, her voice gentle but direct. My predecessor, Empress Valimara, had a younger brother who disappeared from court records approximately a century ago. Official accounts claim he died in a spacecraft accident while exploring the outer reaches. And unofficial accounts? Aiden asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. Unofficial accounts suggest he became fascinated with human culture during the early diplomatic exchanges, that he advocated strongly for closer ties between our species, even when such views were politically unpopular. Her luminescence pulsed in a pattern that might have been hesitation. and that he was one of the primary Zoltheon contributors to Project Genesis. The implication hit Aiden like a physical blow. "You're saying I'm related to Zoltheon royalty? To you?" "Distantly," Lysian clarified quickly. "Very distantly. But yes, if the Guardian's assessment is correct, you carry trace energy patterns from the royal bloodline." Aiden sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb this final revelation. It was too much, too fast. His entire understanding of his identity upended in the space of hours. "This doesn't have to change anything," Soraya said gently, sensing his turmoil. "You are still Aiden Cross, still the man who chose to protect rather than betray, still the man who sees people, not positions." Her words anchored him, providing a reference point in the chaos of revelation. Whatever his genetic origin, his choices remained his own. His identity was built on actions, not ancestry. "We should prepare," he said finally, returning to the immediate concerns of survival. "When Halvex's forces recover, they'll come looking for us. We need a defensible position and a way to contact loyal Imperial forces." Lysian nodded approvingly at his practical approach. "The Crystal Heart Chamber is naturally defensible. One entrance, clear lines of sight. And once the Empress completes her transformation, her renewed energy capabilities should allow her to project a communication signal strong enough to penetrate the forest disruption." "How much longer?" Aiden asked, looking to where Soraya's form pulsed within the crystal's embrace. "Hours yet," she replied. "The natural process cannot be rushed, even with the Crystal Heart's assistance." Aiden nodded, military training taking over as he began to assess their tactical situation. "Then we make our stand here. Lysian, can you still manipulate energy enough to help defend the entrance?" The old advisor tested his abilities, creating a small energy field between his hands. "Limited, but functional. I can disrupt their weapons to some degree, though not with the effectiveness of before." "It'll have to do." Aiden retrieved the energy blade, checking its power levels. "Between the three of us, we might just hold out long enough for help to arrive." As they prepared their defenses, converting the natural crystal formations into barriers and choke points, Aiden found his thoughts returning repeatedly to the revelations about his origin. If he truly carried Zoltheon energy patterns, might he be able to access them somehow? To consciously use abilities he'd never known he possessed? During a quiet moment, he approached Lysian with the question. The old advisor considered it thoughtfully. "In theory, yes. Your energy manipulation abilities have likely been functioning on an unconscious level your entire life, enhancing your reflexes, accelerating your healing, perhaps even influencing your intuition in combat situations. To access them consciously would require training. But in a crisis," he gestured to the crystal formations around them, "this environment might help. The crystal resonance could potentially activate dormant patterns." "How would I even begin?" Aiden asked, feeling somewhat foolish but desperate for any advantage in the coming confrontation. "Start with awareness," Lysian suggested. "Our species perceives energy patterns as naturally as you perceive light or sound. Try to expand your awareness beyond the physical to feel the energy flows around you." It sounded like mystical nonsense, the kind of thing Aiden would normally dismiss outright. But after everything he'd experienced, the ancestral echoes, the memory crystal, the revelation of his origin, he found himself willing to try. Finding a quiet corner of the chamber, Aiden sat cross-legged, the energy blade within easy reach. He closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing as he'd been taught in military meditation exercises designed to enhance combat focus. But instead of narrowing his attention as those exercises required, he tried to expand it, to sense beyond his physical boundaries. At first, there was nothing, just the normal awareness of his body, his breathing, the sounds of the chamber. Then, gradually, he began to notice something else, A subtle vibration, similar to what he'd felt near the resonance spire, but more pervasive. It wasn't just around him. It was within him as well. A gentle pulsing that seemed to match the rhythm of his heartbeat. "Yes," came Lysian's voice, though Aidan hadn't heard him approach. "You're beginning to sense it. The energy patterns flow through all things, but most strongly through living beings. Focus on that sensation. Let it strengthen." Aidan concentrated on the vibration, allowing it to fill his awareness. As he did, it intensified, becoming less of a physical sensation and more something else. A perception that didn't fit into any of his normal sensory categories. And suddenly, with a disorienting shift in awareness, he could see it. Not with his eyes, which remained closed, but with some other sense altogether. Energy patterns flowing through the crystal formations like luminous rivers. The bright, complex signature of Lysian beside him. And in the crystal heart, the dazzling, transforming pattern that was Soraya, more beautiful and intricate than anything he'd ever perceived. He opened his eyes with a gasp, and the perception faded, but didn't disappear entirely. It remained as a kind of overlay to his normal vision, allowing him to see both the physical world and the energy patterns that permeated it. "You've done it," Lysian said, genuine amazement in his voice. "Decades of training, compressed into minutes. Extraordinary." "Is this how you see the world?" Aidan asked, still adjusting to the dual perception. "Always," Lysian confirmed. "Though with greater clarity and control than you're experiencing now. With practice, you could—" He broke off as a distant sound reached them, the unmistakable tramp of armored feet, approaching through the crystal passages. "They're coming," Aidan said, rising fluidly to his feet and activating the energy blade. Earlier than expected. Halvex must have protected his officers with the same technology he used, Lysian surmised, moving to his defensive position near the entrance. "They've recovered faster than the regular troops." Aidan took up his own position, the energy blade humming with deadly promise. But now, with his enhanced perception, he could see something he hadn't before, the blade's energy field interacting with his own energy patterns, strengthening and focusing them. On impulse, he concentrated on that interaction, willing his energy to flow into the blade. To his amazement, the weapon's field expanded and intensified, the blade growing brighter and more defined. "Well," he murmured to himself, "that's new." From the crystal heart, Soraya's voice reached them, strained but determined. "They must not interrupt the transformation. If the process is disrupted at this stage—" "They won't get near you," Aidan promised, his resolve hardening. "Whatever it takes." The approaching footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the distinctive sound of Syntheri speech, harsh, sibilant commands that echoed through the crystal passages. Then, abruptly, they stopped. A tense silence fell over the chamber as Aidan and Lysian waited, poised for the attack they knew was coming. It came not from the entrance they'd been watching, but from above. A section of the crystal ceiling suddenly exploded inward as Syntheri troops rappelled down on magnetic lines, weapons already firing as they descended. Aidan reacted instantly, his newly enhanced perception allowing him to sense the energy signatures of the attackers before they were fully visible. The energy blade flashed in his hands, intercepting plasma bolts that would have struck Lysian and sending them ricocheting into the crystal walls. The old advisor, despite his injuries, contributed to the defense, creating disruptive energy fields that caused several of the Syntheri weapons to malfunction as their wielders landed. But there were many of them, too many for two defenders to hold off indefinitely. As the battle intensified, Aidan found himself drawing instinctively on his newly discovered abilities. His movements became faster, more precise, guided by energy awareness as much as physical sight. The energy blade in his hands responded to his will, its field expanding and contracting as needed to deflect attacks or strike at opponents. But even with these unexpected advantages, they were being driven back steadily toward the crystal heart, where Soraya continued her transformation. A plasma bolt slipped past Aiden's guard, striking Lycian squarely in the chest and sending the old advisor crumpling to the ground, his luminescence flickering weakly. "Lycian!" Aiden called, but couldn't move to help him without abandoning his position guarding Soraya. "Protect her," the old advisor managed, his voice fading. "The Empire needs her." The Centauri pressed their advantage, their disciplined fire forcing Aiden to give ground. A shot grazed his shoulder, then another burned across his thigh. Pain lanced through him, but he fought on, knowing that if he fell, Soraya would be at their mercy. Then, from the entrance they'd been expecting, a new figure appeared, Lord Halvex. His reptilian features contorted with rage and triumph, advanced into the chamber. Unlike his troops, he carried no energy weapon. Instead, he wielded what appeared to be a ceremonial staff, though Aiden's enhanced perception revealed it to be far more than ornamental. Energy patterns swirled within it, dark and disruptive. A harmonic disruptor, he realized aloud, designed to destabilize energy patterns. "Precisely," Halvex confirmed, his voice cold with satisfaction. "Specifically calibrated to the royal bloodline's unique frequency. One touch, and your precious Empress's transformation becomes terminal." Aiden positioned himself between Halvex and the crystal heart. The energy blade held ready despite his injuries. "You'll have to go through me first." "With pleasure," the Centauri Lord hissed, advancing with predatory grace. The duel that followed would be remembered in Zalthion historical records as the Battle of the Crystal Heart. Halvex, genetically enhanced and trained in ancient Centauri martial arts, against Aiden Cross, a human security contractor with newly awakened hybrid abilities. The harmonic disruptor staff clashed against the energy blade, each impact sending cascades of disruptive energy throughout the chamber. Aiden fought with everything he had, drawing on his military training, his newfound energy awareness, and a determination born of something deeper than duty or contract. But Halvex was a formidable opponent, his centuries of experience evident in every move. Gradually, he forced Aiden back, step by painful step, toward the crystal heart where Soraya's transformation approached its critical phase. "You fight well, human," Halvex acknowledged, his reptilian eyes cold with calculation. "But you are still just a human, and I am Centauri nobility, bred for combat through 1,000 generations." A vicious strike knocked Aiden to one knee, the energy blade barely deflecting a blow that would have taken his head. Blood flowed from multiple wounds, and exhaustion pulled at his limbs. "I am more than human," Aiden replied, his voice steady despite his pain. "And you are less than nobility." With a surge of effort, he lunged upward, the energy blade slicing across Halvex's armor and drawing first blood. The Centauri Lord hissed in pain and surprise, backing away momentarily. But it was a temporary advantage. Halvex recovered quickly, his superior strength and stamina telling as the duel continued. A sweeping blow from the staff caught Aiden in the ribs, sending him crashing into a crystal formation that shattered on impact. He struggled to rise, but his body refused to cooperate. The energy blade flickered in his weakening grip as Halvex approached for the killing blow. "A valiant effort," the Centauri Lord conceded, "but ultimately futile, as all resistance to inevitability must be." Aiden looked past Halvex to the crystal heart, where Soraya's transformation had reached its peak. Her form was now almost entirely energy, a dazzling nexus of light and power contained within the crystal's embrace. In his enhanced perception, he could see the complex patterns of her energy signature, more beautiful and intricate than anything he'd ever witnessed. And in that moment of clarity, facing death, Aiden Cross made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Drawing on the last reserves of his strength, on the hybrid abilities he was only beginning to understand, He established a connection between his own energy pattern and Soraya's. Not to draw power from her. That would be unthinkable, especially during her vulnerable transformation, but to offer what little strength he had left. It was an instinctive act, not born of calculation but of a simpler, more fundamental emotion, one that transcended species, transcended duty, transcended the barriers between matter and energy. The connection flared between them, a bridge of light visible only to those with energy perception. Halvex, intent on his victory, didn't notice until it was too late. Soraya's voice, no longer physical but pure energy, resonated throughout the chamber. Enough. A pulse of power emanated from the crystal heart, so intense that it momentarily blinded Aiden's enhanced perception. When his vision cleared, he saw Halvex frozen in mid-strike, the harmonic disruptor staff inches from his head. The Synthari Lord's expression was one of shocked disbelief as tendrils of energy wrapped around him, immobilizing him completely. Throughout the chamber, the remaining Synthari troops were similarly restrained, their weapons rendered useless by the overwhelming energy field that now permeated the space. And emerging from the crystal heart, her transformation complete, came Empress Soraya, but not as Aiden had known her before. Her form was still humanoid, but her luminescence had transformed, becoming more vibrant, more complex, shifting through patterns that seemed to contain entire universes within them. Her silver eyes now held galaxies, and her movements left trails of light in the air that lingered like memories. She approached Halvex, who struggled uselessly against the energy tendrils that bound him. "Lord Halvex of the Synthari Dominion," she addressed him, her voice resonating on multiple levels simultaneously. "You have violated the sacred ground of Elan Va, attempted to disrupt an imperial transformation cycle, and conspired against the Zalthion throne. The traditional punishment for such crimes is energy dissipation, the complete and permanent separation of your energy pattern from physical form." Halvex's reptilian features contorted with fear, all his arrogance evaporating in the face of Soraya's transformed power. "Mercy, your radiance," he pleaded. "I acted only for the greater good of the galaxy." "You acted for your own ambition," Soraya corrected, her tone not angry, but simply factual. "And in doing so, you have caused harm that cannot be undone." She turned to where Lycian lay, his luminescence now barely visible. With a gesture, she drew the old advisor's fading energy pattern into a protective field, stabilizing it. "Even those who betrayed me through misguided loyalty have suffered for your ambition," she continued, turning back to Halvex. "But I will not compound harm with more harm." With another gesture, she summoned what appeared to be a small crystal, similar to the memory crystal Aiden had received, but darker, more opaque. "Your punishment is memory. You will return to the Synthari Dominion with no recollection of your conspiracy, no memory of your ambition regarding the Zalthion throne. You will serve your people as the capable administrator you once were, before power consumed your judgment." The crystal flashed once, brightly, and Halvex's eyes went blank. When awareness returned to them a moment later, there was confusion rather than calculation in their reptilian depths. What has happened?" he asked, looking around the crystal chamber in bewilderment. "An accident during a diplomatic visit," Soraya explained smoothly, her energy tendrils releasing him, but still restraining his troops. "You were injured. Your memory may be affected temporarily." Halvex accepted this explanation with a nod, his manner now that of a confused dignitary rather than a would-be usurper. "I apologize for any inconvenience. Your Radiance. The Synthari Dominion values its alliance with the Zalthion Empire." "As do we," Soraya assured him, her transformed presence apparently registering to him only as impressive rather than terrifying. "Your delegation will be escorted back to your vessels once medical assistance has arrived for the injured." With Halvex neutralized, Soraya turned her attention to Aiden, who had managed to rise to his feet despite his injuries. Her expression softened as she approached him, the galaxies in her silver eyes warming with an emotion that transcended species barriers. "Aiden Cross," she said, her voice gentle despite its multi-layered resonance. "Once again, you have placed yourself between harm and me, at great personal cost." "Just doing my job," he replied, attempting humor despite the gravity of the moment. "No," she contradicted softly. "Far more than that. You offered your own energy during my most vulnerable moment, a gift no one has ever given me before. Do you understand what that means among my species?" Aiden shook his head, still adjusting to the sight of her transformed presence. "Not entirely. No. It is the most intimate form of connection possible, more binding than any ceremonial union, more meaningful than any political alliance." Her luminescence shifted to a warm, violet hue that Aiden was beginning to recognize as affection. "In the oldest traditions of my people, it marks the recognition of a true life bond." The implications slowly dawned on him. "Are you saying we're married? By Zolthian standards?" A smile spread across her transformed features, somehow both alien and deeply familiar. "I'm saying we're connected in a way that transcends such limited concepts. Your energy pattern and mine have synchronized on a fundamental level. Such connections are exceedingly rare, even among my own species." Before Aiden could process this new revelation, a distant sound reached them, the distinctive hum of approaching spacecraft, different from the Syntheri vessels. "The Temple Guardians," Soraya confirmed, her enhanced senses detecting them long before they became visible. "They have responded to my earlier signal. Imperial forces will not be far behind." Within the hour, the crystal chamber had been transformed from a battlefield to a secure medical facility. The injured, including Lycian and the Syntheri troops, were being treated by Zolthian energy healers. Lord Halvex, still confused but cooperative, had been escorted back to his vessel with a diplomatic escort that would ensure he returned directly to the Syntheri Dominion. Soraya, her transformation complete, but her energy still radiating with unprecedented power, conferred with the Temple Guardians, those mysterious, ancient beings who existed as pure energy. Their communication was silent to most observers, consisting entirely of complex energy pattern exchanges. Aiden, his wounds treated but still recovering, watched from a nearby crystal outcropping. His newfound energy perception had stabilized somewhat, allowing him to see the beautiful complexity of the patterns being exchanged, even if he couldn't interpret their meaning. Finally, Soraya approached him, her transformed presence somehow both intimidating and comforting simultaneously. "The Guardians have confirmed what we suspected," she said, without preamble. "You are indeed a product of Project Genesis, a human Zolthian hybrid with latent energy manipulation abilities that are only now beginning to manifest." Aiden nodded, having had time to adjust to this reality. "And the royal bloodline connection?" "Also confirmed. The genetic material used came from my great-uncle, Prince Valerian, who disappeared from court records a century ago. He believed passionately in the potential of human-Zolthian cooperation, even when such views were politically unpopular." "So we're related?" Aiden asked, still struggling with the implications. "Very distantly," Soraya assured him, amusement flickering through her luminescence. "Not enough to be of genetic concern, if that's what worries you." Despite everything, Aiden found himself laughing. "That's good to know, I guess." Her expression grew more serious. "The Guardians have also confirmed the energy bond that formed between us during my transformation. Such connections are recorded in our oldest histories, but none has occurred in over 1,000 years. They consider it significant." "Significant how?" They believe it represents a new evolutionary path, one that combines the strengths of both our species. She sat beside him on the crystal outcropping, her transformed presence making even this simple action seem graceful beyond human capability. The question now is what we do with this knowledge. Aidan considered this carefully. The events of the past days had upended everything he thought he knew about himself, about the galaxy, about his place in it. Yet strangely, he felt more centered, more certain of his path than he had in years. "What do you want to do?" he asked simply. Soraya's luminescence shifted through thoughtful patterns, before settling into a resolved configuration. "For 3 centuries, I've ruled the Zolthian Empire according to traditions established millennia ago. I've rejected 10,000 suitors because none of them saw me as a person, only as a position to be attained." She turned to face him directly, the galaxies in her silver eyes focusing on him with an intensity that would have been frightening if it wasn't also so fundamentally gentle. "You saw me from the first moment, not the Empress, not the institution, but Soraya. And in seeing me, you helped me see myself more clearly." Her luminescence warmed to that now familiar violet hue. "I want to continue that journey of discovery, with you, if you're willing." "As your consort?" Aidan asked, trying to understand what she was proposing. "As my partner," she corrected. "Equal in all things, despite the differences in our origins. The old traditions have value, but perhaps it's time for new traditions as well, ones that recognize the potential of cooperation between species, between matter and energy, between different ways of perceiving the universe." It was a bold proposal, one that would undoubtedly face resistance from traditionalists in the imperial court. Yet Aidan could see the vision behind it, a future where the strengths of different species combined rather than competed, where diversity was celebrated rather than merely tolerated. "The imperial court won't like it," he pointed out. "Neither will the human authorities, once they learn what I am." "Undoubtedly," Soraya agreed with a smile that contained both mischief and determination. "Which makes it all the more worth doing, don't you think?" Despite everything, the pain of his injuries, the shock of his revelations, the uncertainty of the future, Aidan found himself smiling in return. "When you put it that way, yes, it does." From his position nearby, Lycian observed their conversation with ancient, knowing eyes. His betrayal had been forgiven, though not forgotten, and he would spend the coming centuries working to rebuild the trust he had broken. But in this moment, watching the connection between Empress and Hybrid, he felt something he had not experienced in a very long time: hope. Perhaps the Empire would not only survive, but evolve into something stronger, more adaptable. Perhaps the rigid traditions that had guided them for millennia could bend without breaking. Perhaps the future held possibilities even his ancient wisdom had failed to imagine. As imperial vessels arrived to secure the temple and escort the Empress back to Zolthion Prime, news of the events on Elan Va began to spread throughout the galaxy. The official account spoke of an attempted coup by disaffected elements, courageously thwarted by the Empress and her loyal protector. The unofficial accounts, whispered in diplomatic corridors and speculated about in academic forums, hinted at something more profound: a fundamental shift in the relationship between energy and matter, between Zolthion and human, between tradition and innovation. And at the center of it all, an Empress who had rejected 10,000 suitors, but found connection with the one being in the galaxy who hadn't been seeking it. A security contractor with an extraordinary heritage he'd never suspected, who saw her not as a prize to be won or a position to be attained, but simply as herself. In the years that followed, the Zolthion Empire would indeed transform, guided by an Empress whose own transformation had revealed new possibilities for her species and others. Alongside her stood Aiden Cross, neither fully human nor fully Zolthion, but something new and uniquely valuable, a bridge between worlds that had once seemed irreconcilably separate. Together, they would face resistance from traditionalists, skepticism from progressives, and outright hostility from those who feared change in any form. But they would also inspire a generation of cross-species cooperation, scientific exchange, and cultural understanding that would ultimately reshape the galactic order. As for their personal connection, that energy bond formed in a moment of crisis and sacrifice, it would become the stuff of legend, a testament to the truth that real love doesn't seek to possess or control, but to see and understand. 10,000 suitors had sought to claim an empress as a prize. One reluctant protector had simply seen her as a person worthy of respect and protection. And in that simple act of recognition, both had found something neither had been looking for, a future neither could have imagined alone, but that together they could bring into being. 10,000 sought to conquer her. The stories would later say. He simply wanted her to live authentically, and in that difference lay all the difference in the galaxy.